What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto stops asking Sakura out Naruhina? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. Sasuke was surprised to see not Naruto but Naruto's wife open the door. Hinata smiled kindly at him as she ushered him through the door. Naruto is running an errand but he should be back soon, she said in her soft tone, closing the door as he toed off his sandals. She led him into the brightly cheerful living room and gestured for him to sit on the couch. "Can I get you anything?" she asked, her gentle voice and quiet mannerisms not quite meshing with the loudly colored room. She practically seemed to melt into the wall, barely holding Sasuke's focus, and she was the only other person in the room. "No, thank you," he grunted out, hoping she would leave him alone. To his great relief, she simply nodded her head and turned to retreat to the kitchen when the front door slammed open. "Nata, I'm home." Sasuke winced as the loud voice filled the small apartment. Hinata moved to meet Naruto in the entrance hall and tell him their guest had arrived, but wasn't able to get the words out before Naruto swept her up in a deep kiss. Sasuke rolled his eyes at his friend's ridiculous behavior and the pitiful surprised squeak Hinata let out. He watched with a bored expression as Hinata pushed lightly on Naruto's chest to break the kiss. The blonde was obviously reluctant and fought her, but she managed to mutter a quiet, "Sasuke's here," when she turned her head to the side, a light blush dusting her cheeks. Naruto looked up, over her head, and spotted his friend on the couch. He smiled his great big, face-splitting smile and loudly greeted his best friend, not at all ashamed of the fact that he had had an audience when he had tried to eat his wife's face off. "I'll start some tea and leave you alone. Call me if you need anything," Hinata told them, both smiling at Sasuke before slipping into the kitchen. Naruto thumped unceremoniously on the couch opposite Sasuke and propped his feet up on the coffee table between them, his hands folded behind his head. "So," he started off in his usual loud, blunt manner. "How was your mission?" "Fine," Sasuke replied evenly. "Uneventful. When is it any different for you?" Naruto laughed good-naturedly. Sasuke shrugged and vaguely noted Hinata slipping from the kitchen and into the back bedroom. "How has life been here?" he asked. He really was trying to care about this village. "Fine, uneventful," Naruto answered cheekily, a foxy grin on his lips. Sasuke gave him a withering look, unamused with his stupid antics. Naruto shrugged, ignoring his friend's annoyance in favor of his good mood. "It's the same as it always is. Kiba and I spar, Shikamaru watches clouds, Ino gossips, Sakura never leaves the hospital. Same old, same old." Sasuke nodded once and then let his head drop back onto the couch. "Speaking of Sakura," Naruto began suggestively. Sasuke closed his eyes and held back a sigh before lifting his head to look at Naruto. "Yes? Have you asked her out yet?" Naruto asked bluntly. Sasuke rolled his eyes. "No, Naruto." "Why not?" Naruto asked loudly, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "Why are you so insistent on this?" Sasuke asked heatedly. This was not the first time Naruto had bothered him with this subject. "Why are you avoiding it so much?" Naruto countered. "For years you wouldn't shut up about restoring your clan. Who better to do that with than Sakura? She's smart, she's pretty, she's a damn fine kunoichi. She loves your sorry ass from here to Suna and back. If she is so wonderful, why did you marry Hinata?" Sasuke countered back. Naruto looked like he'd been blindfolded, taken across country, dumped in a random ditch, spun around and told to find his way home. "What? Well, you can't stop singing her praises. And you're right. She is smart, she was top of the class, and she was Tsunade's apprentice. She is pretty, everyone agrees. She has become a great shinobi since our genin days." He chose to ignore Naruto's last point. "So why didn't you marry her? You've pined after her for as long as she's pined after me." Naruto stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "What are you talking about? Why did you finally give up on her and marry Hinata? Kami knows they're nothing alike. Sakura is strong, and Hinata, well, she doesn't run around shattering mountains. Sakura's personality matches yours much better. You're both insufferably loud and never stop yelling. Hinata hides every chance she gets." Naruto squinted at Sasuke, trying to wrap his head around what he was saying. "Sakura loves you," he repeated. "So, what?" Sasuke asked. He was honestly curious. He had been absolutely shocked when he had returned to Konoha to find a wedding band on Naruto's finger. He had been even more shocked to learn that its match was on Hinata Hyugo's finger and not Sakura Haruno's. He wanted to know what had happened to land Naruto with the shy, quiet, and overall unimpressive girl. Are you telling me you gave up on Sakura? You decided to settle? I suppose the only real difficulty was getting around Hiashi? If the rumors when we were kids were true, I take it Hinata jumped at any bone you threw her? Naruto recoiled as if he'd been stung and opened his mouth to speak but was cut off. No. Both boys turned to the archway leading to the kitchen. Hinata stood stiffly in the doorway, a tray of tea in her hands. Her normally gentle face had a hardness to it Naruto had rarely seen. It was completely foreign to Sasuke. When had she left the bedroom? You are wrong, Sasuke-san, Hinata said in her quiet manner, but her voice carried an underlying current of steel. I would not have settled. If I knew that Naruto still loved Sakura-chan, I never would have entertained a relationship with him, let alone married him. I do not enjoy torturing myself, and a life like that would have been the worst kind of torture. She set the tray on the coffee table between the boys hard enough to rattle the dishes and then stormed out of the room. Naruto glared at Sasuke when they heard the front door close loudly. She's right. Sasuke jolted out of his stupor and turned back to Naruto. She never would have settled for me. Kami knows I'm not good enough for her as it is. She's stronger than you think. She grew up, a lot like us. Sasuke shot him a skeptical look, but Naruto's glare hardened and made him question himself. How much do you know about the Hyuga? Not much, I guess? You've never been concerned with any clan but your own, Naruto muttered, throwing an arm across the back of the couch, getting comfortable for the tongue lashing he was about to deliver. Let's just say it's not the happiest family to grow up in. Hinata was raised with everyone around her telling her she was a disappointment. I guess in that way you and her have nothing in common, but it gives her and me a hell of a lot of common ground. Where you two are similar is that everyone expected miracles from you both. Everyone told Hinata she was a failure, and then still expected her to know the taijutsu forms, and the clan traditions, and proper etiquette, and everything else. And she did. You had already been taken by Kakashi to have your curse mark sealed during our first Chunin exam, so you didn't see her fight. She had to fight Neji. Remember him? He was one of the few you considered a worthy opponent. He was the pride of the Hyuga. And he wasted no time in ripping her mind to shreds within moments of their match starting. He took every single flaw and insecurity her family had nurtured in her since she could understand them, and smothered them in her face. He took great delight in reminding her that he was the prodigy and she was the worthless heiress. And when she stood up to him and refused to forfeit her match, he almost killed her. Naruto's eyes were hard, in a way Sasuke had rarely seen as they bored into him. Sasuke could tell he was restraining himself, trying to calmly explain something he felt Sasuke needed to understand. When pain invaded, I didn't get back to the village until it was a crater. I don't know if anyone's told you that story, but I failed to beat him pretty miserably. I was pinned to the ground, about to be captured to have Kurama taken from me, and the next thing I know, the most unlikely person in the entire village is standing between me and him. I told her to run away. I told her over and over that she was no match for him, that she couldn't beat him. I told her that, and she straight up ignored me. When I thought he had killed her, Naruto choked off his sentence, his eyes taking on a far-off look. He paused, his fist shaking slightly on the back of the couch. When he ran her through with that chakra rod, I lost control of Kurama in a way I never have before. It was another moment before he raised his eyes to Sasuke again. Yes, Hinata is quiet and shy, and oftentimes she goes so far as to be demure. And yes, Sakura is her complete opposite in just about every way. But that does not make Sakura better than her. They are different, a lot like you and I are different. They can't really be compared. They have both worked incredibly hard for what they have, and they are both incredibly dedicated to being shinobi, and I love them both very, very much. But I have never, in any way, settled for Hinata. In fact, I married very, very high above myself. It's not that I gave up on Sakura, or settled for Hinata, Naruto said heatedly, practically spitting out the word, settled. It's that I finally opened my eyes. Sakura was never going to look at me past you, even when you weren't here. I finally figured out that one of the reasons I wanted Sakura to like me, be with me, was because it would mean that someone would really care about me. They would be able to see past Golden Boy Sasuke Uchiha and find something worthwhile in Naruto Uzumaki. It would mean that I had beaten you at least once. Sasuke stared at Naruto as if seeing him in a new light. Hinata gave me that without ever having to compete with you. She gave me something no one ever has before in my entire life. And she did it in a way that no one ever has before. She never asked for anything. I've never had to work for Hinata's affection like I have for everything in my life. And because of that, it makes me want to work even harder for it. I want to prove to her that I'm worth it, that I'm worth her just handing me everything she has. Naruto chuckled a little before continuing. Did you know, she's the first person that ever said, "I love you," to me? At Sasuke's startled expression he huffed another almost breathless laugh. Yeah, she's the first person. And she did it staring down pain. She told me she wasn't afraid to die protecting me because she loved me. Sakura's never done anything like that. So, I guess you're right, Teme. Hinata and Sakura don't match up, but it's because Sakura can never compare to my Hinata. Naruto surged to his feet. Now get out of my house, he said, not unkindly. I have to go find my wife and make sure she's only pissed off at you and not me. A knock on the door made Kurenai looked up from the salad she was preparing for lunch. Listening to Asami's happy chatter from the living room, she crossed to the front door. She was not at all surprised to see Naruto Uzumaki on the other side. Hey, Kurenai-sensei, he said sheepishly, rubbing the back of his head. Is Hinata here? He asked hopefully. She decided to make him sweat a bit. She leaned against the door and leveled him with her crimson glare. Yes, she is, she replied icily. She bit back a smile when she watched him wilt a little at her tone. Is she that mad at me? He asked quietly. He reminded her of a kicked puppy. She showed up at my door a half hour ago very upset, she informed him aloofly, her arms folded tightly across her stomach as she feigned waiting for an explanation. He cringed in front of her and took a step back. Can you, he started. He cleared his throat before trying again. Can you tell her I'm sorry? He asked her, his blue eyes looking into hers pleadingly. Tell her yourself, she replied kindly, a small smile appearing on her lips. Naruto's surprised expression made her laugh lightly before she told him. She told me it was Sasuke's fault. Come on in. Naruto stepped past her and hurriedly toed off his sandals before stepping farther into Kurenai's small apartment. He paused in the archway to the living room. Hinata sat on the small couch, little, 3-year-old Asami on her lap, babbling away with an upside-down book in her hands. Naruto was struck by the image of Hinata with a child. He could just imagine Hinata sitting on their couch at home, a beautiful little girl that looked just like her on her lap, playing with a stuffed frog. His heart ached for that image to be real. Hinata wasn't really paying much attention to the toddler. She was leaning back into the couch, glazed eyes staring at the book over Asami's shoulder. She jumped a bit when Asami shrieked, "Natu!" and violently flung herself out of Hinata's lap to run to Naruto. She squealed when he caught her under her arms and lifted her into the air, tossing her lightly before catching her and pretending to eat her neck. She shrieked and laughed loudly, kicking her legs against his chest and pushing his face away from her, calling for help. He pulled away, still holding the toddler securely against his chest as she laughed and looked warily toward Hinata. She seemed rooted to her spot on the couch, staring at him with her big beautiful eyes like a cornered doe. He noticed she had clasped her hands in her lap, a habit that had replaced her finger poking sometime when he had been with Jiraiya, and she looked ready to wring her fingers off. Naruto, will you join us for lunch? Kurenai asked, hoping to break the tension that was obviously brewing between the couple. Naruto tore his eyes away from his wife and began to decline, but she cut him off. Excellent. Sammy, why don't you help me in the kitchen? She demanded, pulling her daughter from Naruto's arms and promptly walking into the kitchen, leaving the young couple to sort out their Uchiha problem. Naruto watched the doorway to the kitchen for a moment before turning back to Hinata. She hadn't moved, but still balanced on the edge of the couch nervously, still wringing her hands together. He opened his mouth to apologize when Asami's loud screech and continuous babble cut him off. Again he looked toward the kitchen before turning back to Hinata. Can we go for a walk? He asked softly. Hinata nodded mutely and carefully rose from the couch. She followed him toward the front door, and as she slipped her shoes back on, Naruto called to Kurenai. We're going for a walk, we'll be back soon. Okay, have fun, was all he got in answer. Naruto opened the door for Hinata and allowed her to step outside before him. Kurenai lived in an old apartment building that had survived the invasion from Pain. It had been on the edge of the village and therefore outside of the blast zone. Few buildings had survived that day, but some, like the Hokage Tower and the Hyuga estate, had been lucky. The apartment building was backed by the woods, the enormous trees that gave Konoha its name, and not far into the trees, the river rushed past. By some unspoken agreement the couple wandered into the trees. They knew each other so well, words were often unnecessary, even with thick tension between them. Even when they didn't work, Naruto and Hinata worked perfectly. They reached the bank of the river and stopped, neither having mustered the courage to look at the other. "Suck up your pride and talk to your mate, Kit," Kurama growled inside Naruto's head. "Stay out of it," he bit back. He knew Kurama cared about Hinata. He was extremely protective of the Hyuga, oddly enough. He liked her, and because of how attached Naruto was, it was inevitable that some of those feelings would leak into the demon harbored inside him. "You need to fix this. It was your bastard friend that upset her." "I know," he shouted back, and just as he opened his mouth to apologize, he was again interrupted. "I'm sorry." Naruto gaped at Hinata. What the hell was she sorry for? "Nata," he started quietly, but once again, she cut him off. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to get angry with him. I didn't mean to yell at him," she exclaimed, her back still to him. "Yell at him?" Naruto guffawed. Hinata had spoken her mind, and there had definitely been anger in her words, but she had not yelled at Sasuke. "I know he is your friend, and I shouldn't have snapped at him, but I was just so angry," she continued, and Naruto wasn't even sure she had heard him. "I love you, Naruto, but I would not have married you if I thought you didn't feel the same. I would never have been able to live with myself, knowing every time you looked at me, or kissed me, or laid down next to me each night you wished I was someone else. I know I'm not like Sakura. I know what Sasuke said about her is true, but I did not settle for you." "Nata," he called, grabbing her shoulders and forcing her to face him. "I know," he told her, resting his forehead against hers. "I know you didn't settle for me." Despite the fact that he knew she had settled for him, he wanted to placate her. He knew she saw so much good in him, and she would never accept that she had gotten the worse end of the deal when she married him. And nothing Sasuke said was true. The Teme had no idea what he was talking about. She looked into his blue eyes, a doubtful expression pulling the corner of her mouth down. Sasuke is still trying to readjust to the village. He has stuck to the people he knew before he left, which is pretty much Kakashi, Sakura, and me. He's seen how Sakura has grown, and I think he may really have feelings for her. He's seen how much she's grown, but with you he has nothing to compare to. He never noticed you when we were younger, and he doesn't see how much you've grown. He doesn't think I'm good enough, she admitted quietly. Naruto shot her a questioning look, silently asking her to elaborate. "He doesn't think I'm good enough for you. He thinks Sakura would have been better suited for you, feelings or not. And he's right." "What?" Naruto violently recoiled from her. Where the hell was this coming from? "Nata, what are you talking about? You told me yourself you thought I was quiet and dark and weird," Hinata reminded him, pulling away from him, a panicked look in her eyes. "Sakura is bright and pretty and everyone loves her. You want to be Hokage, Naruto. You couldn't ask for a better companion than her." He could hardly believe what he was hearing. "I don't need to ask for a better companion," Naruto exclaimed. "I have you. I love you, Nata. Why would you doubt that?" A shocked, horrified expression washed over her features now. She violently shook her head, waving her hands in front of her. "No, that's not what I meant. I know you love me, I do. I thank Kami every day that you do." Naruto knew but was coming. But just because you love someone doesn't always mean they're the best for you. There it was. He could see the tears in her eyes as she took another step away from him. Naruto sucked in a deep breath, trying to calm himself, trying to think rationally. He knew he was in very dangerous waters, only a few wrong words away from losing his wife. All because Sasuke was an ass. "Hinata," he began slowly, "I have never once in my life compared you to Sakura. Yes, you are completely different. Yes, you both have your own strengths and weaknesses. But I was always meant to be with you." Watery eyes stared back at him nervously. "Sakura and we don't work. I mean, yeah, we can fight together. We're a great team on the field, but we barely manage to be friends. If we hadn't been forced onto the same genin team we never would be where we are now. We've been through hell and back, for Sasuke, and we have a bond from that. But in a relationship between her and me, it would never work. She gets too angry with me. I know I'm not the easiest person to deal with all the time. But somehow you manage it. You were always so patient with me and so sweet. Where Sakura would hit me, you hug me. Where she would scream at me, you smile. And she could never even dream of comparing to your kisses, he told her, a slight grin breaking across his lips. She still kept her distance, but he saw her shoulders relax a little. Even if you were right, you're not, but even if you were, and being with Sakura somehow made my life easier, he said doubtfully, I'm used to working hard. I want you in my life, believe it. A watery laugh bubbled out of her chest at his old catchphrase. Naruto surged forward, wrapping his arms around her and burying his face in her neck. He swayed back and forth, relishing the feel of her in his arms and her sweet smell filling his nose. No one could ever feel this perfect in my arms, he whispered into her neck. He relaxed when he felt her arms wrap around him like steel cables. It was the best feeling in the world. He pulled away just enough to slide his lips over hers sweetly. He broke the kiss and leaned his forehead against hers, smiling into her gorgeous eyes before a grumble from somewhere between them made him glance at his stomach. They both laughed, the tension between them gone. He stepped away but caught her hand in his, tugging her back toward the village. Come on, one thing I will have to settle for is Kurenai-sensei's boring cooking for lunch instead of yours. Naruto groaned as he rolled out his shoulder. Damn, Teme, do you have to hit so hard? He asked, a joking grin splitting his lips. It's supposed to be my day off. Maybe you shouldn't have asked for a spar then, Sasuke grunted back, rubbing the throbbing muscle in his thigh. Naruto certainly knew how to land a kick. His body felt like it had been sent through a meat grinder and he could already feel the bruises forming. Naruto laughed, squinting at him through one eye. Why don't you come back to my place? Hinata makes a special ointment that works wonders when I get my ass handed to me by Lee. Sasuke paused a moment, trying to think of an excuse, but couldn't find one before Naruto was hauling him to his feet and setting out across the training field. Naruto led the way through the trees, down the path that zigzagged along the edge of the crater that led to the rebuilt village and through the buildings that were still so new to Sasuke. Naruto's hands were buried in his pockets and his face turned toward the sun, soaking up the warmth. He had a bounce in his step that Sasuke had noticed he always got when he was walking home. Here went another attempt at being a real friend. How's Hinata? He tried to make the question sound casual, but it just sounded awkward to his ears. Naruto didn't seem to notice though, and a big smile split his face. She's good. Doesn't like staying home all day, but she's following orders. Naruto had lamented to the Uchiha his, and everyone else's, worries for the young heiress. She was slowly trudging her way through her first pregnancy with Naruto's child and people were practically on pins and needles around her. Tsunade and Sakura were worried about how her pregnancy would progress given her damaged heart. It had always been a bit finicky after her fight with Neji in their first Chunin exams, and the entirety of what was left of the Konoha 12 fussed over her. Hinata was their sweet little princess, as far as Sasuke could tell. Naruto fawned over her for obvious reasons, but everyone else had a special place for the Hyuga it seemed. Kiba and Shino also made sense, having been on the same team for years, a team that was said to be the closest of their age group. The two men, so different from each other, were drawn together by the quiet girl and protected her like their own little sister. Shikamaru and Choji had a great respect for her because of her relationship with Kurenai-sensei and her daughter, Asami. Hinata was the little girl's godmother, and Shikamaru worked closely with Hinata in anything to do with his own late sensei's daughter, as her godfather. Sakura was extremely protective of Hinata because of what she meant to Naruto in addition to being one of the girls. Naruto often showed up at Sasuke's apartment in the evenings looking for entertainment, claiming his wife had been stolen from him by wailing banshees in the forms of Sakura, Ino, and Tenten. Tenten also latched onto Hinata. After the war she had discovered she was pregnant with Neji Hyuga's child. She had been terrified of what would happen to her baby when it was born and had turned to Hinata for help. Hinata had in turn gone to her father to plead Tenten's case. Sasuke didn't know all of the details, but somehow, Hinata had managed to convince the clan not to seal Neji's child, and by doing so had gained a second godchild. Lee's attachment to Hinata was simply terrifying. He had taken it upon himself to take up Neji's role as her protector and did so with unholy amounts of the power of youth. It was nearly impossible to get within 10 feet of the woman when Lee was around. Given that everyone seemed to be obsessed with protecting her, they were all incredibly invested in her health and how her pregnancy progressed. And from what Sasuke had heard, quiet little Hinata was chafing against her restraints. Naruto's monologue about the virtues of his wife cut off abruptly, tugging Sasuke's attention back from his musings. A slight frown was firmly set on the blonde's face as he glared across the crowd milling about the market, his entire mood seeming to take a 180 as a metaphorical thundercloud boiled into existence over his head. "What the hell is she doing?" he asked absently, more to himself than to Sasuke before blazing a trail through shoppers to the other side of the market. Sasuke simply huffed a sigh before following, avoiding contact with the villagers as they detoured to avoid him. "Hinata," Naruto called when he was relatively near her. Hinata Hyuga looked up from the apples she had been examining, her eyes wide open in surprise, to find her slightly irate husband marching toward her, frown still firmly in place. "Naruto," she eeped out, turning to face him a bit sheepishly. Sasuke decided she looked like she'd just been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. "Hello, Sasuke," she greeted him as he stepped up to Naruto's shoulder. He kneed back at her, but chose to say nothing more. Naruto, meanwhile, had his arms folded tightly across his chest as he stared down at his wife, clearly displeased. "Whatcha doing, Hinata?" he asked her tightly. She squared her shoulders a bit as she turned back to him and gestured to the grocery bags at her feet. "Shopping," she informed him. "I can see that," he told her, leaning down to her level a bit, arms still folded crossly. "I meant, why are you here? You're supposed to be at home, Haim." A light blush dusted Hinata's cheeks as she leaned away from Naruto's advance. "We needed groceries. You asked if I could make miso ramen tonight for you and Sasuke. I didn't have everything I needed, so I came to get some. I've only been out for a half hour," she tried to placate him. "Come on, I'm taking you home," Naruto announced, stooping to collect the bags at her feet before effectively frog marching his wife the entire 2 blocks back to their apartment, Sasuke trailing behind. Once home, Naruto dumped the bags on the kitchen table before filling a glass of water and forcing it into Hinata's hand. She took a small sip as he watched her, before setting it down and beginning to go through the groceries. Naruto's smile returned, clearly happy to have his wife back at home, safe and sound, and turned to Sasuke to lead him out of the kitchen when Hinata's dismayed exclamation made him twist around rapidly. Sasuke was 98% sure he had heard Naruto's neck crack and wondered if he had given himself whiplash. "What's wrong, Nata? Are you okay? Is the baby okay? Do you need to lay down?" He was about to scoop her up into his arms and charge into the bedroom when she swatted his hands away, her eyes constantly scanning over the produce laid out on the table. "No, Naruto, I'm fine. But you rushed me out of the market before I could finish shopping. I still needed green onions," she told him, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "Can you? I'll get him," Naruto offered before she could finish her sentence and zipped out of the apartment. Hinata shook her head distractedly before getting to work. "Make yourself comfortable, Sasuke," she told him, twisting her hair up into a loose bun and beginning to pull out a cutting board and a knife. He started again toward the living room but stopped, something nagging at his mind. He had to know what she had been thinking. "Why did you do that?" Hinata startled, looking up from the vegetables she was chopping. "Do what?" she asked uncertainly. "Why did you go to the market?" She looked very confused, like she wasn't sure what the right answer was. "Because I needed groceries." "Why didn't you ask Naruto to go?" he asked heatedly, his temper rising. "I just did," she reminded him gently. Her expression of confusion was slowly warping into one of worry. For him, he realized. She was worrying for his mental sanity. "No," he growled out, trying not to explode at his best friend's wife. "I mean, why didn't you send him in the first place? Why did you go at all?" Without warning, Hinata's open expression closed up, like a steel door slamming shut. A neutral expression took its place and she returned to her cutting board. "He told me he was spending the day with you," she told him flatly, her voice still somehow managing to sound soft and sweet. "I am perfectly capable of buying my own groceries. I don't need to send my husband to do a housewife's errands." His eyes dropped to her stomach, taking in the slight swell that gently butted up against the counter. Her condition bubbled up in his mind, all of the possible complications that had Naruto on edge swirling in his thoughts. She really was a petite woman, and despite the fact that she seemed to have the hips for childbearing, the rest of her was downright tiny. Was such a minuscule woman truly capable of giving birth to a child, Naruto's child? Kami knew it wouldn't be easy on any woman. Despite Naruto's confidence in her abilities in every other aspect of her life, Naruto bemoaned how her family had treated her whenever the subject was brought up. The Hyuga had doubted her nearly since the day she was born. She was a girl, to begin with, when a son, although perhaps not absolutely necessary, would have been preferable. She was tiny, and didn't exactly inspire much confidence. Her very nature was so juxtaposed to the life of a ninja, the idea that she could ever really succeed in that path was almost laughable. Her skills had always been lacking, far behind what her sister was capable of. How could an entire clan with eyes that saw everything be wrong about her? On top of that was her medical past. Naruto, Tsunade, Sakura, practically the whole village worried for her heart. Naruto said it gave her trouble when she caught anything that dragged her even a little under the weather. Sakura was practically beside herself, worrying that Hinata's pregnancy would throw a metaphorical wrench right into her condition. She was still kicking herself, wondering if she should have placed Hinata on bed rest. Hinata knew all of this. She knew that everyone worried for her. And there she was, on one of the hottest days of the year, milling around the marketplace carrying 4 bags of groceries all by her lonesome. What the hell was she thinking? And now, when Sasuke was trying his hardest to be interested in her, be worried for this woman that his friend cared so much for, she was angry with him? Do you know how upset Naruto was to find you out there? He asked, again, trying to rein in his burning temper. Hinata set her knife down with more force than he had expected of the quiet woman, air rushing out through her nose. Really, she said, her sweet voice sounded odd, trying to convey so much annoyance. Did Hinata even get annoyed? I do not understand why everyone is fussing over me so much. I am pregnant, not ill. My heart is fine. It was an injury from a long time ago, and it has healed. There is absolutely nothing wrong with me walking around the market buying vegetables. Sakura almost put you on bed rest. Sasuke informed her. She has been questioning herself ever since she chose not to. Do you have any idea how many people are worrying over you? Her eyes snapped up to him with a fire he had only seen a few times before. You are going to lecture me about knowing if people are worrying for me? It was possibly the most biting thing Hinata had ever said to him. I know they all care about me. I understand that. But I cannot and will not ask Naruto to drop every little thing he is doing to run around doing things I am perfectly capable of doing. He wasn't doing anything important. Sasuke countered. In a small corner of his mind he was shocked he was having such a heated match with Hinata Hyuga. Where these emotions were rising from, he could not even begin to guess. We were sparring. We can do that any time. He could have helped you. He didn't need to. I'll not pull him away from you for useless reasons. That brought Sasuke up short. He didn't know what to say and was vaguely aware of his mouth moving on its own. What? Was his intelligent question. Hinata heaved a long sigh and turned back to her vegetables, precisely picking up her knife and slowly beginning to chop her vegetables again. I know you don't like me, Sasuke. Had he made it that obvious? He truly had been trying to treat her civilly. I know how much you care about Naruto. I did not need to give you another reason to dislike me by asking him to run petty errands for me. Sharing Naruto with you is simply something I will have to live with if I want to be a part of his life. And I want that very, very much. Before Sasuke could jumpstart his brain enough to reply, the front door slammed open and a loud Naruto announced his return. If he noticed the tension in the air when he stepped into the kitchen, he did a good job of ignoring it. He set his grocery bag on the counter next to Hinata, wrapped his arms around her and planted a quick kiss on her cheek before turning to Sasuke and saying, "Come on, let's give Hinata room to work her magic. No one makes ramen like her." And without further ceremony, wrapped an arm around his shoulder to drag him into the other room. He motioned Sasuke to the couch before muttering something about finding the ointment and disappearing into the bedroom. Sasuke heard Naruto rummaging around for a few minutes before calling, "Nata? Where'd you put your healing ointment?" "In my beside table," she called back from the kitchen, her soft voice somehow managing to carry through the apartment. A cry of victory soon followed and Naruto came marching triumphantly out of the bedroom, holding a small container aloft. He set it on the coffee table and plopped onto the couch opposite Sasuke, pulling his shirt over his head and tossing it back through the bedroom doorway. The Kyuubi must have already started its work on him because the bruises that littered his chest were far fewer than he should have had. The ones that remained were already turning yellow, giving the appearance of being weeks old. Naruto leaned forward, opening the container, releasing the scent of time, and scooping a liberal amount onto his fingers before smearing it across a large collection of bruises on his ribs. He hummed as he massaged the ointment in, grimacing every once in a while when he pushed on a particularly tender spot. "Help yourself," he said, nodding his head at the container sitting on the table. The two tended to their wounds in silence for a few minutes before Naruto leaned back into the couch, a contented sigh heaving out of his chest. "Works wonders, doesn't it?" he asked Sasuke through sleepy eyes. He nodded but didn't say more. Although he didn't possess the incredible healing prowess of the nine-tailed fox, Sasuke had to admit, the ointment was definitely helping his sores. Sasuke jolted awake when Hinata stepped into the living room and informed them dinner was ready. She stood behind Naruto's shoulder, gently shaking him awake. It took a second for Sasuke's brain to catch up with his eyes and he realized he had dozed off. He couldn't remember the last time he had just dozed off. It had to have been before he even made genin. Naruto caught Hinata's hand and planted a kiss on her palm before rising and following her into the kitchen. Sasuke followed at a slower pace and stepped around the archway in time to see Naruto swat Hinata's hands away from the pot of ramen on the stove and carry it to the table for her. He noted her expression looked both annoyed at his mollycoddling and pleased that he was trying to help. Dinner was a quiet affair. Or at least as quiet as it could be, with Naruto inhaling at least half the pot of ramen and insisting that Hinata needed to eat more. She took it all in stride, a small content smile on her face, and Sasuke had to wonder if she had been even half as flustered by their conversation as he had been. It was another week before Sasuke was faced with another conversation with the quiet Hyuga. And once again, he was blindsided by it. Konoha was hosting a celebration to commemorate the end of the Fourth Shinobi War and to remember and honor those that were no longer with them. Foreign dignitaries and Kage swarmed the village, old comrades, shaking hands and swapping stories, sat in the shade under the leaves, and bright stalls lined the streets, filling the village with delightful scents, bright colors and a unique energy. Naruto and Sakura had dragged Sasuke into the sunlight, insisting that he had helped end the war and therefore should obviously participate. Sasuke did not agree, but could not find it in himself to deny them. He followed his friends around, smirking as Sakura made Naruto try a spicy dish from Suna, and the following spectacle Naruto performed trying to scrape the spices off his tongue. The orange ninja stuck a bit closer to his wife's side after that and refused to try anything Sakura offered him. At some point in the day, Sakura was dragged from the group by a laughing Ino, waving that she would catch up with them later that night before disappearing into the crowd. Naruto continued to drag them from one vendor to the next, smiling at everyone and trying to pamper his wife. It wasn't until night had fallen and the Kage had assembled on the roof of the Hokage Tower that Sasuke once again found himself alone with Hinata. A ceremony to honor the fallen had been prepared and the crowd pushed and shoved them, everyone trying to get into the square. The Kage had appeared out of the crowd to haul Naruto away to the tower to be recognized for all he had done, leaving Sasuke with Hinata. He watched her try to make room for the strangers around them, trying to make herself as small as possible. His Sharingan flickered on of its own accord when an elbow jabbed Hinata in the back, and he suddenly felt a pang in his chest. His hand moved on its own to block another reveler from falling into her stomach. It took him a moment to realize he was worried for her safety. Without saying anything, Sasuke scooped an arm under Hinata's knees, ignoring her surprised "oh," and leapt onto a roof directly across the square from the Hokage Tower. It wasn't until he had gently set Hinata back down that he took a moment to analyze his emotions. He had been worried for this tiny mouse of a girl. He rationalized that she was important to Naruto and he never would have forgiven Sasuke if something happened to Hinata under his watch. Trying to ignore how much that sounded like a lie, he glared down at the mob in the street, whooping and cheering for the Kage that stood on the roof. "You're going to have to get used to it sometime." His eyes snapped up to the woman beside him. "Get used to what?" he asked in his normal broody way. She shrugged and waved a vague hand toward the crowd in the street. "This. I've accepted the fact that you are a part of Naruto's life, she told him, her soft eyes staring up at him. He searched her eyes for the same hatred and accusation he found in most looks aimed at him in the village, but found none of it. Instead, there seemed to be, almost a compassion and empathy for him. But you are going to have to accept something too, Sasuke-san. You have been gone for a long time. And in that time, Naruto has made a life. He left a place for you, and there is no doubt he wants you here. But you are going to have to accept that you are not the only person in his life. She spoke gently, nothing like she had the week before, but her words still felt like kunai hitting home. You're going to have to share him, she informed him, still in her gentle manner. With Sakura, and Kakashi, and Sai and Yamato. And Gaara, Killer Bee, Tsunade-sama, and everyone else. Sasuke did not miss that she left herself out of that list, and he suspected she hadn't done it on purpose. He suspected she had absolutely no intention of making Sasuke share her husband with her. And right then and there, Sasuke resolved that he would do everything in his power to make sure that he never got between Hinata and her husband ever again. Because however much Naruto needed him, or he needed Naruto, Naruto needed his wife more. Because she did what no one ever had. She gave him everything, without ever asking for anything in return. And it was something that Sasuke decided he could work for with Hinata. Walking through the gates again was a bizarre experience. He had been convinced at one point in his life that he would never again set foot through these gates. The fact that about 20 yards past those gates lay a sheer drop-off into a crater that had definitely not been there before just added to the disorienting experience. Sasuke tried hard to ignore the shocked glares from the two gate guards in their hut. Naruto's loud, cheery voice greeted them with a friendly wave, but the party did not slow their pace. Kakashi and Shikamaru continued to lead the way into the village. They slipped down the switchbacks that lead to the village, still under construction in many places even nearly 4 years after the village had been destroyed. Sasuke grudgingly had to admit, he never would have been able to destroy the leaf to this extent. As the 8 shinobi quickly slipped through the village, Sasuke did his best to ignore the stares and the whispers, the pointing. It was to be expected. He had been a rogue ninja and he was now returning. Civilians gossiped about far less important things than the last Uchiha returning to Konoha. Of course this would spread like wildfire. He held back a sigh of relief when they slipped into the relative privacy of the Hokage tower. His stomach flipped as he braced himself to meet the Hokage. Naruto had been singing Tsunade's praises the entire way back to the leaf, but Sasuke had his doubts. This was a Hokage that had never met him, that had not seen him grow up as she had Naruto and the others. She was not the Sandame. He was skeptical of how much mercy she would have for a man she had only ever seen as a rogue traitor. He wanted to be back in Konoha, and she was the one that would decide his fate. Kakashi rapped his knuckles on the door to the Hokage office before leading the team inside. Kiba Inuzuka, Shino Aburame, Choji Akamichi, Rock Lee, and Naruto lined up against the back wall while Kakashi pulled Sasuke up front and center to stand between him and Shikamaru Nara right in front of the Godem Hokage. Mission accomplished, Lady Hokage, Shikamaru announced, a pleased smirk on his face. Sasuke figured his ego had been stroked a bit. Retrieving Sasuke had been the first mission Shikamaru had led as a Chunin, and it had failed spectacularly. Sasuke guessed the Nara felt he had finally redeemed himself, leading the mission that had finally brought the last Uchiha back to the village. He hadn't wiped that smirk off his face since Naruto had dragged Sasuke back to the team and announced they could go home. Well done, Captain Nara, she answered, leaning back in her chair and lacing her fingers together under her chin. Anything to report? Nothing, ma'am. No casualties or complications. Our intel was superb and the plan went perfectly. Excellent. I'll review your written report then and take care of the paperwork. You're all dismissed, go get some rest, Tsunade said with a smile at her shinobi before opening a drawer in her desk and pulling out a small stack of papers. You stay, Naruto. Come on, Ba-chan. I want to go home. The loud blonde complained, slumping dramatically as the others slipped out the door. Kakashi was the last to leave and he sent a cheerful smile at Sasuke with a lazy salute before he closed the door. Tsunade's brow twitched as she turned her attention to filling out a form, not bothering to look up at him. I don't know why you're in such a rush. She's not even there, she said, making a small note on the paper in front of her. Naruto snapped to attention faster than Sasuke had ever seen. What do you mean, she's not there? He asked suspiciously. She asked for a mission, was the absent-minded reply. What? Naruto squawked indignantly. What do you mean a mission? He echoed again. When will she be back? Tsunade breathed out sharply through her nose, slapping the form down on her desk and leveling Naruto with a glare. I mean she came to my office and requested a mission for her and her team. She is a Jonin instructor, after all. We had no idea how long you would be gone and she didn't want to sit around, twiddling her thumbs, waiting for you to come back all banged up. They left about a week ago. We're expecting them either tomorrow or the day after. Naruto groaned and slumped his shoulders, his head hanging low. What about? She's gone, too. She went with them, in fact. What? Tsunade rolled her eyes at his dramatics. The mission was to purchase medical supplies for the hospital in Suna. I sent Sakura to do the buying and Hinata's team to escort them home. You have more important things to do, anyway, Naruto. He grumbled something Sasuke couldn't quite catch, his arms folded tightly across his chest, glaring at the wall. I mean it, Naruto. Tsunade insisted. I'm putting you in charge of Sasuke. What? It took Sasuke half a second to realize that his protest had carried an echo that sounded decidedly more cheerful. Once again, Naruto's attention had been grabbed like a magnet. Don't look so surprised, Sasuke. You have been a rogue ninja for nearly 7 years now. I can't have you wandering around the village on your own. You threatened to destroy it more times than the Akatsuki, the Hokage reminded him. And who better as your parole officer than the man that brought you back? Sasuke was not pleased. But I helped take down Madara, he protested vehemently. And multiple other Akatsuki. And you nearly killed Naruto when you first left, Tsunade countered, pointing an accusing finger at him. Since then, you've tried to kill Sakura and Kakashi, you were a member of the Akatsuki for a short time, you attacked the cage, and you tried to capture Killer Bee. Perhaps if you had returned to the village right after the war this would be simpler, but you didn't. You chose to disappear for 3 years and only agreed to come back when Naruto hunted you down, once again. We have no idea what you've been up to in that period beyond your word of what you did, and the elders are already wary of you without a back testimony. The only thing you have going for you right now is that Naruto trusts you. Tsunade tapped her fingernail on her desk soundly, as if to bring an end to the conversation. Now, she said, shuffling the forms she had just finished. Naruto, you are to escort Sasuke to Inoichi and Ibiki for a full psyche exam. I know you don't want it, Sasuke, but you are going to have to put up with it if you have any intention of staying in this village and getting out of the Leaf's bingo books. Prepare yourselves for a long few months, my boys, because that is exactly what you are signing up for. And with that, Tsunade handed the forms to Naruto and waved them out of her office. Sasuke was only vaguely aware of Naruto's loud complaints as they stepped back out into the sun. He had expected the meeting with the Hokage to go much worse. She had barely looked at him before waving him out of her office with only Naruto as security? What was that woman thinking? He was the most dangerous criminal since Obito, for Kami's sake. Don't look so surprised, Kakashi said casually, materializing at Sasuke's side, a familiar orange book in one hand. Tsunade doesn't trust you as far as she can throw you. But she does trust Naruto and she is going to give him the benefit of the doubt. She's won much bigger bets by putting everything on him. Sasuke wasn't sure how to reply to that. Besides, she has about 4 Anbu teams tailing us, Kakashi informed him, casually turning a page in his book, as if being tailed by Anbu was an everyday occurrence. Of course, with Kakashi, that was very possible. I came back because I want to be here. If I didn't there would be no way in hell the Dobi could have brought me back, Sasuke told Kakashi through a growl. She knows, he replied, not at all ruffled by Sasuke's downright antisocial mannerisms. It's why you want to be here that has her on edge. Because she has no way of knowing how genuine your intentions may or may not be. Sasuke gave a valiant effort to wrangle in his temper, but even so a small growl escaped him. His new goal was to restore his clan. The Uchiha were one of the founding clans of Konoha and it was only right that it be reborn here. Why couldn't people see that? This was his new priority. Danzo was dead, Itachi had been avenged, and Kabuto and Orochimaru had paid for that abominable reanimation jutsu they had cast on him. The clan was all that mattered now. The clan and Naruto. Well, looks like this is where we part for now, Kakashi said. They had reached a non-assuming concrete building. There were no windows to be seen and the doors were heavy steel that groaned on their hinges as Naruto dragged them open. Ibiki Morino stepped out into the sun and greeted Naruto with a smile and a firm handshake before glaring at Sasuke, who now stood alone. Kakashi had made his exit without him even noticing. Sasuke marched over to the interrogator as Naruto handed him the forms and patted Sasuke on the shoulder. "I'm not allowed in, but I'll be back in a few hours. Good luck." And with that, he left him in the hands of a sadist. It took all of Sasuke's much depleted strength to stand up straight as he stepped out of the interrogation room. Never would he have expected to experience such a grueling, exhausting, and all-around painful confrontation with two-leaf shinobi. Having another person digging through his memories had been more unsettling than he had expected. He had most certainly underestimated Ibiki Morino and Inoichi Yamanaka. Naruto sat on the floor against the wall across from the door, and as soon as Ibiki had stepped out he was on his feet. "Hey," he called to Sasuke. "You okay?" He gave a small nod. "You're free to take him, Naruto. Lady Tsunade wants to meet with you tomorrow morning at 8 to go over the report we'll hand her," Ibiki informed him. "For tonight, you two are to stick together and cause as little trouble as possible." "Thanks, Ibiki," Naruto said, clearly relieved that his best friend wasn't going to be locked up. "Come on, Sasuke, we'll crash at my place." The sun had set, perhaps an hour before, and the moonlight completely transformed Konoha. Green leaves and brown bark appeared as though they had been cast in silver and shadows danced all around. It was unsettling to know that he was in Konoha, but not recognize anything. He followed Naruto closely as they walked silently through the village. It wasn't until they had reached Naruto's apartment and he had pulled his key out to unlock the door that the moon enlightened Sasuke to something else that hadn't been present the last time he had been in Konoha. "What the hell is that?" Sasuke asked, his eyes riveted to the platinum band on Naruto's left hand. It had most certainly not been there before. Naruto looked down at his hand as he swung the front door open. "What?" he asked, an eyebrow climbing toward his hairline. Sasuke raised his own eyebrow. "That," he answered, jabbing a pale finger at the ring. "My wedding ring?" Naruto asked uncertainly. "What do you mean your wedding ring? You're married? To who?" Sasuke was absolutely sure that he had never been more shocked in his entire life. "Hinata," Naruto said with a small shrug, like it was the most obvious thing in the world before leading the way into his apartment. It took a moment of intense thought to remember who Naruto was talking about. An image of a tiny little girl with short dark hair standing in a corner of the academy classroom came to mind, but Sasuke wasn't entirely sure that was the right face. "When the hell did that happen? How did that happen?" Sasuke asked. It felt like the entire planet had just dropped out from under his feet. Naruto shrugged again, but a smile had split his lips as he dropped his keys into a bowl sitting on a table in the hallway. "We got married a little over a year ago. About 5 months before Hinata got her genin team." He stated these incredible facts like they had always been facts. And, Sasuke supposed, they had been, for a little over a year apparently. "You didn't have it before. When you found me." Sasuke stated it rather than ask. He was asking too many questions in his opinion. Naruto nodded, his thumb idly rubbing the underside of the band. "Yeah, we're not allowed to wear them on missions. I picked it up from home when I dropped you off with Ibiki and Inoichi." His other hand went to a cord around his neck that disappeared into the front of his shirt and his fingers rolled the cord absent-mindedly as he leaned against a doorway into what Sasuke guessed was the kitchen. Sasuke doubted he was even aware of what was probably a very common habit. "Hinata and I usually have each other's rings on us when the other is on a mission, but since Ba-chan said she was on a mission I figured she had left mine at home." Sasuke still wasn't understanding something. "You were always so caught up in Sakura. I figured she was who you were asking Tsunade about. I did ask Ba-chan about Sakura. But I wanted to get home to see Hinata," Naruto told him. "Not that it matters since Ba-chan sent her out," he complained sullenly, crossing his arms and pouting at the carpet. Anyway, Hinata sort of stampeded her way in. And Sakura was only too happy to trade places with her. He didn't sound at all upset about lost loves as he turned into the kitchen, beckoning a hand over his shoulder for Sasuke to follow him. "Grab a seat and I'll find us some grub." Sasuke sat stiffly at the small table. This had to be the most bizarre experience yet. He Sasuke Uchiha was sitting in Naruto Uzumaki's brightly colored kitchen in Konoha while said Uzumaki dug around in a fridge to feed him. Words could not describe how awkward and uncomfortable he was in this moment. Silence reigned as Naruto puttered around the kitchen, reheating leftovers and serving Sasuke before digging into his own helping. After nearly 10 minutes of that damned frog clock ticking away, Naruto spoke. "You can relax, ya no." Sasuke's dark eyes shot up from his plate. He had been pushing the food around more than he had been eating. "No one's going to attack you." Naruto's dark eyes pinned Sasuke to his chair across the table, pleading with him to trust him. "If Tsunade was worried about something, she would have locked you up. Besides, I've got barrier seals all over this place." Sasuke didn't know what to say, so he just nodded once. Naruto thankfully dropped the subject and turned back to his food. Sasuke pushed his portion around his plate some more, the ticking of the clock resounding like a hammer in his head as the silence dragged out. He wasn't accustomed to silence in Naruto's presence and it was grating on his nerves. "You never answered my question." Naruto paused. He had been filling his plate for the 4th time, and shot a confused look at Sasuke. "How you and Hinata ended up together?" "Oh," Naruto said as he went back to filling up his plate. "Well, it just sort of happened, I guess. Nothing started until after I came home after the war though." He was home. It still hurt, to look out over the crater that stretched out under the Hokage faces. But to see the new buildings rising up between the tents eased the pain. Naruto smiled as he heard wind rustling through green leaves. He had been bouncing around the elemental nations since the war had ended, doing everything in his power to heal a world that had literally been shaken to its foundations. And now, 10 months after he had defeated Obito, Madara, and the 10 Tails, he was back in Konoha where he belonged. But his work still wasn't done. There was so much to do. He had an entire village to rebuild, new shinobi to train, pranks to pull, friends to see, and a very serious conversation to have. He heaved a sigh, feeling a weight leave his shoulders as he looked out over the village. "Happy to be home?" Kakashi asked, following the hyperactive blonde at a more relaxed pace. "More than you'll ever know, Kakashi-sensei," he answered. Kakashi smiled at him briefly before raising a hand in farewell. "I have to report to the Hokage. Later." And with that, he was gone. Naruto smiled. He was finally free to do as he pleased for the first time in years, really. First order of business, Ichiraku Ramen. He was halfway to one of his favorite places in Konoha when he literally ran into Rock Lee. He was peeling himself off the pavement of a rooftop when his ears were assaulted by a very loud, very excited green-clad ninja. "I am so sorry. I did not mean to run into you, but I was unable to see." Naruto looked up to see his friend shooting the "nice guy" pose obviously intended for him but aimed slightly to his right. A black blindfold covered Lee's face from the tip of his nose to his bushy eyebrows. "Lee, what are you doing?" Naruto asked, rubbing the lump that was forming on the back of his head. Lee whipped the blindfold off, staring down at Naruto with wide shocked eyes. "Naruto, I told Tenten that if I could not do 50 laps around the village blindfolded I would watch Kazu for the entire month." "Oh, that's right, I heard Tenten had her baby. How old is she now?" Naruto asked. Lee's smile grew even wider. "She is 7 months old and has the pure essence of youth. And you have returned just in time to see her. Everyone is meeting at Yakiniku-Kyu. You must come now that you have returned to the village." The idea sounded fantastic. Naruto had hardly seen any of his friends in the last year. It would seem ramen would have to wait. The two shinobi bounded across the rooftops and made it to the barbecue restaurant in record time. They were the last ones to arrive. The remainder of the Konoha 12 sat at the largest table in the back of the restaurant, chatting and joking and causing plenty of noise. Naruto was surprised when the noise level got even louder when they spotted him. Sakura squealed and leapt from her seat, nearly knocking him off his feet when she collided with him. Akamaru barked loudly as Kiba shouted a cheery greeting and an enthusiastic "welcome home," but didn't make a move to rise. Shikamaru raised a lazy hand at him past Choji, who was already busy grilling meat and ignoring Ino's harping. Sai smiled at him, a real smile, but was locked into the booth sitting next to Shino, who threw him a small nod. Tenten smiled and called a greeting as she wrestled her daughter on her lap. And there at the back of the group, Sitting in the corner was the person Naruto was the most excited and apprehensive to see again, Hinata Hyuga. He could still see her charging pain, ready to slam her palm into his back. It was as if the image had been burned into his retinas. The memory of that fight still plagued his mind, coming to the surface when he least expected it. The memory had also haunted his nightmares, although never as it had truly happened. Something was always different in his nightmares, and it usually revolved around her dying. He had seen her pinned to the ground as he had been, or her head removed from her shoulders, or her eyes ripped out, all by pain as he lay there, unable to move, unable to save her. He had lost count of the times he had screamed himself awake, calling her name, a hand reaching into the darkness of his room. And he was certain, if there was one thing his nightmares had taught him, it was that he needed Hinata Hyuga in his life. He just had to talk to her first. The problem was so much had happened so fast there hadn't been time to talk to her. One moment he was in the middle of a battle by himself, and the next she was there, standing between him and the strongest, cruelest opponent he had ever fought. And then the fight was over and the war was on. There simply hadn't been time to talk to her. The fact that he hadn't even been able to remember that she had proclaimed her love for him in the first place was like pouring salt in the wound and rubbing it in ferociously. He never remembered anything that led to him losing control of the Kyuubi. When Kurama had shown him what had happened he almost hadn't believed it. He had remembered fighting pain, and knew something to do with Hinata had set him off, but he had not remembered what she had confessed to him, or why he had lost control so completely as to summon 8 tails. He still wasn't sure if he was grateful Kurama had shown him the first time someone had told him they loved him, or furious that he now had the image of pain stabbing Hinata in his mind. It had been nearly a year since the war had ended, and although Kurama had reminded him what exactly it was that had caused him to release 8 tails of chakra in one fell swoop, he had not approached her about it. How could he? He had never been in a situation like this. Hinata Hyuga was completely uncharted territory. She was unlike any other woman in his life. Sakura, Tsunade, Ino, Tenten, even his mother were all so different from her. Every woman he knew loved to yell and fight and hit him over the head. But Hinata was quiet and sweet and she had never hit him. If he hadn't seen her fight he would have doubted if she was even capable of hitting someone. Hinata simply radiated a peace and sense of quiet about her. Even when he had been forced to watch her battle pain, his heart hammering in his ears, there had been the strangest sense of tranquility as he watched her fight. And she loved him. No one loved him. He was the village pariah, he had been ever since he could remember. Just because he had been put on a team and found friends among his peers did not change that. The majority of the village had still loathed him until he had defeated pain. He had no idea how to respond to what she had confessed. So he had allowed himself to be swept up in the flurry that was the Fourth Shinobi War and its aftermath. He still had no idea what he was going to say to her, but he had to talk to her. He had to convince her that he needed her in his life. He just hoped he wasn't too late. The volume never dropped below a dull roar as the group caught up over lunch. They swapped stories, told jokes, ate food and passed Tenten's daughter, Kazu, around. She only seemed happy when Tenten or Hinata held her though. Tenten was the first to leave. Kazu had fallen asleep on Hinata's shoulder and Tenten used an afternoon nap as her excuse. The others quickly followed, each welcoming Naruto home before going their separate ways to continue their day until it was only Naruto, Sakura, Sai and Hinata left. Before he could gather his courage, she was saying her goodbyes and walking out the door. He tripped over his feet in his haste to follow her, tossing a quick goodbye over his shoulder to Sai and Sakura. He was blinded for a moment as he stepped out into the bright sunlight but spotted her walking down the street in the direction of the Hyuga compound. Hinata, he called her, raising a hand in the air to grab her attention. Her hair swung around her shoulders as she turned, bright eyes spotting him instantly and a small smile dancing on her lips. He ran to catch up to her. She waited for him patiently, her hands clasped in front of her, and looked at him expectantly when he stopped in front of her. Hey! All intelligent thoughts seemed to have flown from his brain as he looked down at her pretty face. Hi, she answered back, her head tilting to the side a bit. At some point as he was gazing like an idiot at her smile, he realized he still had no idea what to say to her. His hand reflexively went to the back of his neck and he laughed a bit nervously. Can we, this wasn't working. He heaved out a big breath and tried again. Can we talk? She still looked a bit confused, but still smiled at him, which was good, right? Of course, Naruto. He was glad that she was Hinata and not one of their other friends. She hadn't shot him some stupid rebuttal like, we already are talking, baka, and he was grateful. He was having enough trouble as it was. He motioned for them to keep moving and tried to gather his thoughts. She was distracting though. They were 18 years old now. Naruto had known her, or at least known of her since they had started the academy when they were 6. Now she was walking beside him, a beautiful 18-year-old woman, and he had no idea how to talk to her. How was Suna? Her question snapped him out of his daze. She had briefly looked up at him when she had asked her question, but now she stared at the pavement in front of them. I'd heard that was where you were right before you got back. Suna, he repeated, his brain trying to focus on something other than her pretty eyes. Yeah, it was great. Shikamaru was there when I got there, but he came home a few weeks before I did. It was nice, I like Suna a lot, but it's nothing like home. She smiled again, although her eyes remained on her shoes. They were wandering and had ended up at the park. Without saying anything, the two shinobi meandered over to the swings and sat. Naruto still had not found the best way to bring up the subject he desperately needed to discuss, so he decided to hell with it. He was never good with tact anyway. Hinata, I've been meaning to talk to you for a while. He watched as she gently swung back and forth, her feet in one place on the ground but her swing gently swaying back and forth. She was waiting expectantly for him to continue. I know I should have talked to you sooner, but with everything that happened, there wasn't really any time. I know it's a lame excuse, but he dwindled off. He was always so good at talking to people. Why couldn't he find the words he needed now? No one had ever told me they loved me, before you did. He noticed her entire body go rigid, the swing stopping as her knees locked. He couldn't tell if it was good or bad. I grew up without anyone. I mean, yeah, people were around, like old man Hokage, and the people he assigned to watch me and buy my food and make sure I was clean, but it was just a job to everyone. A job they all hated. That had been one of the worst times in his life. These people coming into his house and taking care of him the way he saw parents taking care of their kids, but staring at him with those eyes. It was only beaten as the worst part of his life by Sasuke leaving the village. I didn't even know who my parents were. And I know, my parents probably told me they loved me before they died, but I couldn't remember that, so it didn't really count. Naruto was having trouble looking at Hinata. He was bearing his soul here, and he had no idea if she even still felt the same way she had 2 years ago. It was terrifying. He took a peek at her, out of the corner of his eye, and wondered for a second if she was still breathing. What I'm trying to say is, when you jumped in front of pain for me, and told me why you did it, I didn't know how to react. And then I thought he had killed you, and I lost control of Kurama, so I didn't even remember anything, and… What? Her quiet voice snapped his eyes to her. She had a flaming blush coloring her cheeks, but she looked confused as she stared at him. At least she was still here, had talked to him. But he wasn't sure what she was asking about. His confusion must have shown on his face because she asked, "What do you mean, you didn't remember?" "Oh, that." Again, his hand rubbed the back of his neck and he tried to shrug a bit, look casual, but it didn't really work. "I can never remember stuff when I lose control of Kurama. I never remember what I do, or what made me lose control. One moment I'm somewhere, and the next I wake up and see a mess everywhere. I almost killed Jiraiya once, and I hurt Sakura, and I had no idea I'd done anything." Oh, the small comment was so quiet and so unexpected Naruto almost did a double take. She was still sitting on the swing, staring at him, but he had expected her to freak out. Scream and run away, pass out, like she always did, anything but simply shrug it off like that. He was talking about losing control of the freaking demon that was sealed in his gut, for Kami's sake. But, if you never remember, then how? How did he know to talk to her? How did he remember she had told him she loved him? Kurama told me. I never remember anything, but he does. When gained control of him during the war, he showed me what had happened. He was running out of words. What did he say next? Again, her only response was her small, "Oh." He sucked in a deep breath and braced himself. "Look, Hinata, I haven't been able to get you out of my head for over a year. I don't know if you still love me." "I do." The interruption was as unexpected as her reaction before. He looked at her, wide-eyed, and felt like he couldn't breathe. "I love you, Naruto. It's not going to change." Her simple declaration held so much conviction it almost felt like a physical weight on his shoulders. He felt the biggest smile he had ever had in his life split his face. "You're incredible. Ya know that?" he asked, shaking his head a bit. Her blush darkened and she looked back at the ground again. He backtracked and started again. "Look, Hinata, I like you. A lot. I want to tell you I love you back, but I don't really know what that feels like. I mean, yeah, I love my friends, and I love the village, and I love my parents, but what I feel for you is different. I know I like you, more than I've ever liked anyone. Way more than I've ever felt for Sakura, which I know means something, but I don't know, for sure, if it's love. And I don't want to tell you I love you if it's not. But what I do know is that I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop worrying if you're okay, and wanting to be with you. I know that I want you in my life, as a big part of my life. So, what I'm asking is if you'll give me a chance to learn what loving you is like. So that when I do tell you I love you, I can know that it's true." Hinata didn't say anything for a moment. It felt like an eternity. Finally, she looked at him again. She took a deep breath and then said, "Naruto, I don't want you to feel like you have to do this." He opened his mouth to tell her he most certainly did not feel like he had to do this. He knew that he had to do this, but not because he was guilty. Before he could get the chance, Hinata raised a palm, asking him silently to wait. "I didn't tell you I loved you to try to guilt you into anything. I don't expect you to love me back just because I told you. I want you to be happy, that's all." Naruto's hand reached out and wrapped around hers before he had even really registered he had done it. "Hinata, you're not forcing me into anything. I want to love you. I do. The only reason I'm not telling you I love you now is because I want to know that what I feel is really love, and not just really like. I want it to be real the first time I say it, not the 4th or the 5th or the 100th. I want to know that I really mean it the way it's supposed to be meant every time I say it to you. I know I want to be with you." Hinata's pearly eyes drilled into his, pinning him in place, searching for something. He felt her hand move and her fingers lace between his. She smiled a small nervous smile, nodded, and told him, "Okay." 3 months later, as they curled up on his couch to watch a movie, she nestled her head into the spot where his neck met his shoulder. Her arm was draped over his stomach and he had an arm around her shoulders. She sighed contentedly, and as the movie started it hit Naruto like a chidori. This was it. This was exactly what he wanted for the rest of his life. He wanted to love this woman in his arms for the rest of his life. His arm tightened around her shoulder, pulling her even closer, and he tapped a finger on her forehead to get her attention. Those gorgeous bright eyes turned up to meet his, a small questioning frown knitting her eyebrows together. "I love you," he whispered. He didn't see the shocked expression on her face because he had already pulled her into a kiss. After that, I don't know, Naruto shrugged, a little bemused smile on his face. "We dated for a while and then I asked her to marry me. The whole thing was kind of a lot of hurry up and wait, I guess. She told me she loved me and then the war started, so we had to wait. And then I realized I wanted to be with her while I was away from the village, and I just wanted to run home and talk to her, but I had to wait. Then I got home and we were suddenly together, and then we just let things play out. That's kind of how a lot of things go for us. Everything happens at once and then we coast, and then a bunch of stuff happens again, and after, it calms down for a while." Sasuke understood exactly what he meant. There had been nothing between Naruto and Hinata before, aside from her rumored one-sided crush. And then suddenly a war starts and she confesses her love. They fell into the routine of the war and nothing happened. Events began to change and Naruto came home and their relationship shifted drastically, and then they fell into routine again. Somewhere on a level Sasuke wasn't entirely aware of. He wondered what would happen now that he was back to stir the waters again. Although her tired body protested, Hinata practically flew home from the Hokage Tower. Her team and Sakura had made better time than they had expected and were only a few hours from Konoha when night had fallen. It had been her kids' decision to press on and sleep in their own beds that night. When Tsunade-sama had dismissed them, they had all turned to shuffle out of her office except Hinata. The whole reason she had taken this mission in the first place was to keep herself busy while he was gone. Tsunade glanced up from her report with a small smile and said, "Better hurry home, Hinata. He wasn't very happy when he got back and I had to tell him you weren't here." She had gone straight out the window, propriety be damned. Quietly toeing off her sandals by the door, she slipped through the dark apartment back to their bedroom and froze in the doorway. He had been gone for a month trying to bring home his wayward friend, and finally, he was back home, safe and sound. And taking up the entire bed. She silently shrugged off her flak jacket and set it on the floor by the door before padding over to the bed and perching on the edge. Her husband lay spread eagle on his stomach, his face half buried in her pillow, she noted with a happy feeling bubbling up inside her. She gently reached out and brushed his long bangs away from his eyes. He was about due for a haircut. She didn't want to disturb his sleep, but she couldn't help wishing he would wake up and she could fall into that gorgeous blue she hadn't seen in a month. Her wish was granted and he stirred a bit, leaning into her fingers slightly as his eyes lazily opened and followed the hand on his face to its owner. A sleepy smile crept along his face as he shifted to his side and a hand came to press into her hip. "Hey, Haim," he mumbled, still obviously half asleep. Hinata could literally pinpoint the moment his brain caught up with his eyes because that sleepy smile exploded into a full-blown grin, and the hand on her hip bolted around her waist, dragging her down into his chest, and a pair of warm lips found her forehead. "You're back," he exclaimed excitedly, although sleep still dragged his voice into a low murmur that made her insides tingle. "So are you," she said happily, snuggling her nose into his neck. Her tired body simply went boneless in his arms. Over a year of marriage and she still hadn't found a better place in the world than his arms. She doubted if she ever would. One arm left her back, leaving a cold space in its place as he tugged a cord over his head. She couldn't hold back her smile as she offered him her left hand wordlessly. She knew this was his favorite part when she came home. He slipped the simple diamond and pearl ring on her finger. She could feel his smile as he pressed his lips to her fingers. "Welcome home," he whispered into her hair, his voice still carrying that achingly low husky quality she loved. She expected him to drop off to sleep again so she could go take the shower she desperately needed, but he just shifted closer, tangling a leg with hers and asked, "How'd it go?" She was sure she stank, but he obviously wasn't letting her go anytime soon, so it was his own fault if he wanted to suffer through her stench, she supposed. Fine. It was only a C rank because it went out of the village. The hardest part was dragging those supplies back, she mumbled into his neck. "Gaara says hello." He grunted in acknowledgement but said nothing more. He obviously wasn't going to offer any information on his own mission, and she wasn't sure if that meant it had gone incredibly well, or had catastrophically failed. Did she dare ask about it tonight? Or should she wait until the sun rose and made everything seem a little less bleak? The words were halfway out of her mouth before she realized she was asking. "How did your—" Well, she had already come this far. "How did your mission go?" she asked, her voice as quiet as a mouse's. He shifted again, pulling her to him tighter, and heaved out a tired, but satisfied sigh. "Fine," he echoed her, cheeky even when he was half asleep. "It was only an S rank because his name is Sasuke," he said, laughing a bit at his lame joke, and Hinata giggled at his mood. He was falling into that goofy streak he got when he was incredibly tired. She obviously wasn't much more awake than him though, because her tired brain seemed to take an age before it connected that the mission going fine meant it had been a success. Like a bolt of electricity had shot down her spine, Hinata was wide awake. She stared into her husband's sleepy face, his eyes closed now as he began to doze off. How could he be so relaxed about this? He had been working to bring Sasuke back to the village since he was 12 years old. 8 years of his life had finally culminated into success, and he had informed her of that success with a lame joke while he was half asleep. She wasn't even sure she wanted to think about the fact that this now meant there was an incredibly dangerous S-rank criminal in her village and she just happened to be married to his best friend. A light flipped on in the kitchen and her stomach plummeted. She looked at the dim light filtering around the corner of the hallway through the open bedroom door. She hadn't bothered to close it because she had thought she was with the only other person in her home. No way in hell, she begged whatever deity that may have been listening. Please tell me he didn't bring him here." Gently wrestling herself from her sleeping husband, she moved to the door, but once again froze. Her limbs refused to obey her and she knew, logically, she should not check who was in her kitchen. But she had to know. Taking a deep breath, she forced her foot out the door and crept to the end of the hall. There were not many people in the world that Hinata Hyuga did not like. She wasn't even sure she would go so far as to say she hated anyone. But it was safe to say Sasuke Uchiha was at the top of that list and dangerously close to towing the line of hatred after everything he had put Naruto through. And he was standing in her kitchen. There, at the sink looking out the window with a glass of water in one hand, his back turned to her was a man she had only glimpsed 3 years ago. Before that she hadn't seen him since she was 12. Before she could even blink she was slammed against the wall behind her, a kunai at her throat and blood-red eyes glaring at her. Her brain caught up with what had happened and she heard glass shatter on the floor on the other side of the kitchen. Instinct took over. Her Byakugan flared to life and a palm shot toward the wrist holding the kunai at her throat. She barely missed, but her eyes told her she had been close enough with her chakra to close the main tenketsu point. She wouldn't realize until the next morning that she had actually scored a hit on Sasuke Uchiha. Her other hand was already sailing toward his stomach when she had grazed him, but he leapt back to the other side of the kitchen, barely avoiding the shattered glass on the floor. Hinata knew enough about visual jutsu to know not to look at his face, so she watched his body, waiting for his next attack. She nearly sent a Jiyuken strike straight into Naruto's ribs when he appeared in front of her suddenly, standing between her and the man in her kitchen. "Sasuke," he barked, holding a hand out to the edgy Uchiha. His other hand reached behind his back searching for Hinata and she latched onto it, probably squeezing too hard, but she didn't care. He was here and she was going to be okay. "You told me you had seals on this place. Who is she?" Sasuke demanded, his Sharingan still flaring angrily. Naruto's hand was still raised towards Sasuke like he was trying to calm a cornered animal. "She's my wife, and you nearly killed her. I don't think you're the one who should be upset right now, Teme. Turn that thing off, Kurama's ready to bite your throat out." His voice was calm but commanding. Nothing happened for nearly a minute. Finally Hinata gathered her nerves enough to peer around Naruto's back. She peeked over his shoulder just in time to see crimson melt into onyx. She couldn't help the sigh that escaped her and she felt Naruto's fingers squeeze her own, trying to reassure her. "What happened?" Naruto's words were short and clipped, and Hinata nearly cringed. He was incredibly edgy and nervous. No matter how much he trusted Sasuke, he was not comfortable with his wife being in the same room as a volatile Uchiha. "She snuck up on me," Sasuke answered accusingly. Hinata wanted to scream. She hadn't done it on purpose. She was trying to be cautious. There was an S-rank criminal in her home. It was not her fault. But she could not, for the life of her, get her body to respond. She was positively frozen. The adrenaline from being slammed against the wall and the heat of the moment was quickly leaving her system and the severity of the situation was catching up to her. She had just been attacked by Sasuke Uchiha. The fact that she was still alive was nothing short of a miracle. She was vaguely aware that her entire body had begun to tremble and she wilted against Naruto's back. His fingers tightened around hers again. "So you slammed her against the wall and held a kunai to her throat?" Naruto bit back. "I've had assassins after me for the last 8 years. What did you expect me to do?" Sasuke's voice was low and didn't carry even a hint of remorse. "How about trust me?" Naruto pleaded. "You're not on your own anymore. Not everyone is trying to kill you." Sasuke said nothing in reply. Naruto bit back a growl before shaking his head violently. "Go back to sleep." When Sasuke didn't move, Naruto repeated himself, his voice practically dripping with authority and a hint of anger finally peeking through. "Go." When the door to the guest bedroom closed, Hinata's knees gave out. Naruto barely caught her and gently slid to the floor, cradling her into his chest. She was vaguely aware of his attempts to soothe her, whispering into her ear, telling her she was okay as his hands smoothed over her hair and face, but the dam broke and tears began streaming down her face as she clung to him. Hinata had no idea how long she cried. She simply curled into the safety of Naruto's arms trying to calm down, but for the first time in her life, being in his arms wasn't enough. Hinata had been in many dangerous situations in her life. She was a shinobi, and a damn good one, and that had led her to take increasingly dangerous missions as she had risen through the ranks. But she had only ever been that close to dying 2 times in her life. The first had been when she had stared down pain. She had paid for that with a chakra rod through her side. The second time she had again been beside Naruto as she looked into the cold, unfeeling eyes of Madara Uchiha. The entire world had nearly died that day. But never had she been so close to being simply murdered. And she had been alone. The reality nearly crushed her as she sobbed. If she hadn't reacted in the split second she had, if she had not lashed out by sheer habit and instinct, she would be dead right now. She didn't even want to imagine what would have happened if Naruto had not come to her rescue. Eventually her tears slowed, and then stopped. Her throat ached, she could feel a clumped knot of hair at the nape of her neck that badly needed to be brushed out, her head throbbed and breathing felt like too much effort. She felt Naruto's arms around her, a hand brushing down her tangled hair as the other rubbed her arm. She was still curled up in his lap as he leaned against the wall in the hallway. As she rubbed the tears from her face she saw watery gray light creeping in through the window above the sink. Her tired eyes flitted to the frog clock on the wall of the kitchen and she saw it was nearly 6 in the morning. Any infinitesimal speck of energy that might have been left in her body fled in that moment. She had run hard on her way home from her mission. She had been exhausted when she had stepped through the door and now she had cried the entire night away after nearly being killed in her own home. She felt Naruto's arms tighten around her when her body sagged against him even more and she bit back new tears. How she still had any left to cry was beyond her reckoning. She felt lips press at the bangs on her forehead and curled into Naruto even more. For some reason, the fact that he was shirtless stood out to her like it was the most vital detail she had ever noticed. She pressed her cheek against his chest, flattening a palm against his abs and tried to draw comfort from the contact. He didn't try to say anything and she was grateful, but at the same time she needed, to hear his voice. Her raw sore throat fought her, but she managed to choke out the first thing that came to her mind. What is he doing here? She felt Naruto cringe. It was small, but pressed up against him as she was there was no way she could have missed it. Tsunade put me in charge of him. She told me you weren't due home until tomorrow or the day after, so I figured he could crash here. I'm sorry. Hinata nodded slightly. Her calm nature was rapidly returning, surprising her. Years of Hyuga upbringing at work she mused absently. Tsunade-sama just let you bring him here? She found that hard to believe. Tsunade was not the Godem Hokage for nothing, and she hadn't evaded her debtors for years by being an idiot. But to leave Sasuke with only Naruto as security seemed awfully trusting. She wants me as close to him as possible. There are 5 Anbu squads stationed around the apartment, but they couldn't get in because of my seals, he told her. He shook his head before rubbing an eye, pressing his fingers into the corner by the bridge of his nose. Like a switch flipping, Hinata's attention was diverted from the situation onto Naruto. Are you okay? She asked him worriedly, a hand gently grazing the line of his jaw. He groaned but nodded. Yeah, I'm fine. Kurama's having a fit. It's giving me a headache. What's wrong? She prodded. Anything that bothered Kurama was generally bad. He's been yelling at me for the past 4 hours to kill Sasuke for letting him anywhere near my mate, he told her. He dropped his head and pressed his face into the spot where her neck met her shoulder. He hates every Uchiha on a good day. Kurama likes you, and is very protective of what he considers his. Because you are mine, he thinks of you as his also. He is not happy that Sasuke attacked you. He's howling for his blood. Hinata had interacted with the 9-tailed fox that resided in her husband only a handful of times. The most notable was the night before her wedding. Something had woken her, although she had never been able to put her finger on what. She had found Naruto crouched in the corner of her room staring at her intently. When she had called to him, asking what he was doing there, he had given a low-rolling chuckle and she knew it was not her fiancé she had been dealing with, but the fox. Oddly enough, in all of her dealings with the demon, she had never once felt threatened. In fact, she felt a protectiveness and possessiveness that was nearly impossible to distinguish from Naruto's own. She wasn't surprised to hear that Kurama was upset that one of his greatest foes had attacked her. Naruto groaned again, his fingers closing tightly on her arm for a moment as his face pressed deeper into her shoulder. She raised a hand to his temple and pushed a wave of healing chakra into his system, hoping to soothe both him and the beast. After a moment she felt a breath of relief against her collarbone and Naruto mumbled his thanks. Can we just go to bed? Hinata asked in a small voice. She just wanted to forget everything that had happened tonight. She wanted to curl up next to her husband in the safety of their bed and block out the world, even if only for a moment. Naruto's eyes glanced at the clock and his shoulders sagged. Tsunade wanted to meet with Sasuke and me to go over his psych exam at 8. Fat chance that's going to go well. Will you just hold me? Until you have to go? She asked. She wasn't ready to leave the safety of his arms yet. Naruto's answer was a soft, tired smile. A kiss on the cheek and a quiet, of course. As she laid down on the soft bed, her body ached, but she ignored it as she burrowed into Naruto's chest, breathing in his calming, familiar scent. When the darkness took her, oblivion had never felt sweeter. What was she going to do? What the hell was she supposed to do? What the hell was she going to do? She couldn't even think straight right now. Tenten buried her face in her palms and a frustrated, terrified growl grew into a scream. She dug her fingernails into her forehead, then pushed her palms up over the tiny little crescent indents. What was she going to do? The cold tile of the bathroom wall pressed into her back and her toes curled. Who did she tell? Who could she tell? What would she say? What the hell was she supposed to do? The heels of her palms dug into her eyes before she slid them down to her cheeks and peered through her fingers. Sitting innocently on the tile where she had dropped it was a little plastic stick. That damn little pink plus sign blazed brightly at her mockingly. How could she have let this happen? Neji was dead, and she was carrying an illegitimate Hyuga child. Hours later, Tenten still had no answers. She had barely managed to lift herself from the bathroom floor on unstable legs, not bothering to even look at the test, and make herself some tea. She sat at her kitchen table, a cold cup of tea sitting untouched in front of her. What was she going to do? Her slack hands balled into fists for a moment before she pressed them flat against her face and heaved out a shaky sigh. She shook her head and slammed her palms down on the light wood of her table. This wasn't her. She needed to get her shit together and figure things out. First things first, who was she going to tell? Everyone would know eventually, but she needed someone before that. Her mind briefly flitted to Lee and then she violently recoiled from it. No, Lee, bless his heart, was not who she needed right now. What she needed was someone with medical experience. The two obvious choices loomed before her, but she was hesitant to take either one. She wasn't particularly close with Sakura and she didn't particularly like the idea of finding pity in those green eyes. Tsunade was out. She wanted a solid plan in her head before she approached the Hokage. The entire village would know the second she told Ino. Shizune never even crossed her mind. Then, without any warning, Hinata Hyuga's face emerged before her. Although she was not nearly as experienced as Sakura, Ino, or Tsunade, Hinata did have a knack for healing. She had enough skill, both medically and with her Byakugan, to at least confirm if Tenten was indeed pregnant. And they were close. All of Team Gaia loved Hinata. Originally it had been because of her strength and resilience in the face of her clan and Neji's hatred. Then it had simply grown with Neji's change of heart. But Hinata was a Hyuga. Tenten had no idea how she was going to go about raising this child. The Hyuga clan was the most powerful and influential clan in the entire village and quite possibly the entire country. They were a proud people who had rigid traditions and did not take kindly to those that didn't honor those traditions. Conceiving an illegitimate child outside of the clan was a good example. On the other hand, Hinata wasn't exactly a typical Hyuga. She had never been, and Tenten knew firsthand just how much that particular fact had needled at Neji as a child. Where the Hyuga were stoic, cold, and distant, Hinata had a vivacity for life, a heart bigger than any in Konoha, and always tried to help others even if she didn't think she was qualified. She smiled and loved and was the embodiment of everything the Hyuga suppressed. But she's still a Hyuga, a dark little voice whispered to her. And there was a small possibility that Hinata would stand by her family in this matter. In an instant, another path opened up before her feet. She didn't have to fight the clan over this. There was no need for a confrontation. They would want the child, no doubt, and Tenten could simply give it to them. They were, after all, one half of the baby's family. She could leave the child with them and everything would go back to how it was. She could continue to pursue her goal of becoming a renowned kunoichi. She wouldn't have to confront the clan. She wouldn't be branded as a single mother and ostracized by the people of the village. She didn't even have to tell all of her friends. She could simply go away for a while and they would never be the wiser. Like a match being lit, something inside of her snapped and a door slammed shut on these thoughts. For a moment, Tenten couldn't even move. Horror welled up inside of her at the thought that she had actually considered abandoning her own child to the cruelty of the Hyuga clan. She knew, better than most, what happened to branch members in that family. She didn't want to imagine what a bastard child of a branch member would be put through. And there was no way in hell she would let Neji's child be sealed. Drawing in another shaky breath, Tenten resigned herself to the path laid out before her, and wondered if perhaps there was more to all that destiny nonsense after all. There hadn't been a choice to begin with. Having made up her mind that Hinata was her best chance at an ally, and honestly the more she thought about it, the better having a friend on the inside sounded. The next problem before her was how to get a hold of Hinata and tell her. Simply walking into the compound was too risky. She was planning on simply having Hinata use her Byakugan to see the child, and walking into a clan that regularly used that Byakugan when they trained in the compound was a bad idea. Lunch, perhaps? But not somewhere too public. Despite how well Tenten felt she knew Hinata, the girl had been pulling quite a lot of unexpected stunts lately, like charging a madman hell-bent on capturing Naruto, and staring Madara Uchiha in the eye. Who knew what the girl would do next? Tenten didn't want it to be blurting out that she was pregnant. The training grounds, maybe? Tenten snapped her fingers when the perfect place came to mind. The waterfall just south of the village. It was one of Hinata's favorite spots and she and Tenten had spent many afternoons off relaxing in the water. Tenten figured she could press Gongli or Kiba into getting Hinata out of the compound. Feeling better with a somewhat solid plan in mind, Tenten rose from her table, dumped the cold tea in the sink, grabbed her keys, and walked out her front door. She was just down the street from the bakery when she found exactly who she wanted to see. Hinata had just stepped out of the door with a brown paper bag in her hand. Violently quelling the unease that bubbled up inside her, Tenten raised a hand and called out to Hinata. When those pale Hyuga eyes met hers, so like Neji's, Tenten felt like she'd been hit by a Biju bomb. Trying to shake it off, she smiled at Hinata. "Hello, Tenten, how are you?" Tenten's heart warmed. Everyone greeted people like that, but with Hinata the sheer sincerity simply washed off of her words. She never said anything she didn't mean, and if she asked how you were doing, it was because she genuinely wanted to know. "Ah, I actually wanted to talk to you about that," Tenten replied, a nervous smile twisting her lips. "Are you free this afternoon?" Hinata looked surprised, but nodded. "We can talk now, if you'd like," she offered, and Tenten felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She nodded eagerly and asked, "Can we go to the waterfall?" Hinata smiled and nodded again and the two set off. They chatted easily on the way. If Hinata noticed Tenten's tense mood, she didn't say anything. When the waterfall appeared through the trees, Tenten's stomach heaved unpleasantly. She couldn't stall, or she would never get it out. Hinata climbed atop her usual rock and looked expectantly at Tenten. Heaving out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, Tenten turned squarely to face Hinata and looked into her soft eyes. "Hinata," she began, balling her shaking hands into fists at her side. "I need you to look at me, with your Byakugan, and tell me if you see anything different." Hinata's delicate dark eyebrows knitted together and she looked slightly worried, but she didn't question Tenten. In an instant, the chakra pathways around her eyes swelled and her eyes pinned Tenten in place. Tenten watched anxiously as the small frown deepened for a moment, confused, and then disappeared altogether as Hinata's jaw dropped open. Chills crawled up her spine as she waited for Hinata to say something, do something, but nothing happened. The silence dragged out and grated on the weapons mistress's nerves, and she suddenly realized she was grinding her teeth together. Deliberately unlocking her jaw, Tenten watched Hinata, trying to think of something to say, how to explain what those all-seeing eyes had just discovered. "Please say something," she begged. She could feel herself beginning to shake, and again she balled her hands into fists to try to control herself. The chakra pathways around Hinata's eyes receded back into her skin, as if they had never been there, and the pretty heiress raised both hands as if to hold her head before she stopped. A beat passed and then Hinata was off the boulder and in front of Tenten, grasping her shoulders gently but firmly. "Are you all right?" she asked deliberately, her voice still soft and quiet as she carefully enunciated each word. Tenten opened her mouth to speak but still had no idea what to say. She faltered and her hands shook. She felt Hinata's delicate fingers squeeze her shoulders reassuringly, and a small, comforting smile briefly touched her lips. "Is it his?" Before she could stop them, tears welled up in Tenten's eyes and she bit her bottom lip but nodded her head. She couldn't bear to look Hinata in the eyes. She was vaguely aware of being lowered to the ground and firm arms wrapping around her shoulders as she choked down sobs. She would not cry. She didn't have time to cry. She had to figure this out. Sucking in a deep breath, Tenten pulled herself out of Hinata's embrace, brushing the few tears that had escaped from her cheeks. Hinata kept a calming hand on her arm and waited for a moment. "I hadn't realized you two were so close," she admitted, silently asking Tenten to explain. A weak chuckle escaped her as she sniffled and wiped her nose. "We weren't." Hinata's surprised face called forth another watery laugh. "It just sort of happened. I'd liked him for ages, but it was Neji. He always tried to act like he didn't even have feelings. Then we got our orders and he suddenly had to talk to me and tell me how important I was to him and how he hoped things would be different after the war. He told me he loved me, Hinata. He said the only reason he had never done anything was because he was worried about the clan and that I wouldn't want to be a part of that. It happened the night before we were deployed. We were worried and scared, and we weren't thinking straight." She knew she wasn't making much sense, but now that she had started talking the words wouldn't stop. "And now he's gone, and I'm here and I don't know what to do." The tears were threatening to come back and she bit her tongue, hard, to keep them at bay. Hinata's hand rubbing soothing circles on her back helped. "We'll figure this out, Tenten. I promise." She sounded so sure, and so confident. Hinata had definitely grown up. "I know you don't really believe in it, but I think this must be fate at work." The look Tenten shot her was almost a glare. "Really?" Hinata pressed, eagerly, that small smile returning to her face and shining Tenten with a little bit of hope. "It's a miracle. Something of Neji is still in this world. It survived the war. If that's not fate, I don't know how you'll explain it. But what are we going to do?" she asked, trying to keep the misery out of her voice, if only because Hinata seemed so hopeful. "There is no way the clan is just going to let this slide. And there is no way in hell I am letting them put that damn seal on my baby's face. Not now that Neji is finally free of it." The fire in her own voice made Tenten feel a little better. She could handle this. She would beat this. "I'll never let that happen." The fire in her voice was matched in Hinata's eyes. "We'll have to speak to my father." Every nerve in Tenten's body flared to life. Her muscles locked up and she nearly ran away. Small fingers dug into her shoulder, keeping her in place. "We can't do this alone, Tenten. He is the head of the family, and he is the only one that can possibly give us a chance of protecting your child from the seal." "What can he do?" she asked, acidly. "Your elders do whatever they want as long as they say it's tradition. And branding branch members with that abomination actually is tradition." "What?" "He's stopped them before." Hinata interrupted, her voice harsher than Tenten had ever heard it. It stopped her cold. The determination in Hinata's eyes had magnified. Her surprise and confusion must have shown on her face because Hinata sighed before she spoke again. "He's kept the elders from sealing someone before. Haven't you ever wondered why neither I, nor Hanabi have a seal? I'm 17, Hanabi is 12 and neither of us have been sealed. Haven't you ever questioned why that is?" Logically, Tenten knew it was an anomaly. According to everything she knew of the Hyuga, Hanabi should have received the caged bird seal years ago. And if not, Hinata should have it now. Dumbly, she shook her head, not knowing what to say. Hinata spoke slowly, trying to help her friend understand. "My father's twin brother was sealed by the time they were 5. Neji was sealed when he was 4. The fact that Hanabi and I have avoided the seal this long is not a coincidence or an oversight. My father could not stand the idea of sealing me because I was his firstborn and rightful heir. However, when we were younger, Hanabi showed more promise than me. She was his Neji, and he could not allow another prodigy to carry the caged bird seal simply for being second-born. So he used my lack of skill as an excuse to keep from sealing Hanabi while insisting that because I was the rightful heir, I should not be sealed. My father has played a very dangerous game with the elders for many years to avoid sealing us. Although my father has officially reinstated me as the heiress, he has been avoiding bringing up Hanabi's status so he doesn't have to seal her. With all the unrest from the war, it has worked so far. I do not believe he will allow the fate of his brother and Neji to fall upon this child. But he is the only person that can prevent it." Having said her piece, Hinata closed her mouth and waited for Tenten's decision. What was she going to do? Again, that despicable question loomed in her mind. Tenten was beginning to doubt she would ever be rid of it. She could not leave her child's fate up to the Hyuga, could not abandon this innocent child to the cruelty of their traditions. If Hinata believed that Hiashi was the only one capable of protecting her child, then she would have to place her faith in him as well. She had decided to ask Hinata for help, and now she would have to take what she was offered. No matter how bitter it tasted. The Hyuga compound was quiet, as usual, when Hinata led Tenten through the front gateway. Tenten flinched as the branch members on either side of the path give them a once-over before respectfully nodding. It had taken nearly half an hour to convince Tenten to come to the estate to speak with her father. She was borderline petrified someone's Byakugan would catch a glimpse of her and know what was going on. Hinata had argued that even if they did happen to see that she was pregnant, there was no reason for anyone to suspect the child was Neji's. Many of Konoha's kunoichi had been taken off the active duty roster because of unexpected pregnancies. Tenten and Neji had not been the only scared couple. It was late in the afternoon, when most of the family were enjoying their personal time, most either meditating or pursuing various hobbies, tucked away in their own parts of the estate. Even so, Hinata took care to take the less used hallways in search of her father. Tenten was jumpy enough as it was. "What are you doing?" Hinata and Tenten whipped around, trying not to look guilty. "Hanabi," Hinata greeted, gaining her feet faster than Tenten. "Have you seen father? We need to speak to him." Hanabi eyed her sister suspiciously. Hinata never brought friends home. And she never asked to see father. Hanabi's curiosity couldn't be helped. Hinata had to speak to her father about this. The girl was going to find out sooner or later, anyways. Speaking to the clan head was what was important right now. Hanabi didn't answer immediately. Her pale eyes skipped back and forth between her sister and her cousin's old teammate skeptically but had no real reason to withhold anything. "Try his study. He said he would be in there most of the day." Hinata thanked her and quickly ushered Tenten away from Hanabi's curious eyes. Hinata quickly steered Tenten to Hiashi's study and quietly rapped on the door. It wasn't technically rude to interrupt the head of the family, but simply showing up at his door and expecting to be let in certainly wasn't considered polite. Hinata straightened her shoulders and assumed the Hyuga mask, as Kiba called it, preparing for her father's rebuke. When they were called to enter, Hinata quietly slid the door open, passed through and then closed it behind Tenten. Her father had not glanced up from his paperwork at their entrance, but waved a hand for them to take a seat before his desk. Both girls knelt on the tatami mats and waited to be acknowledged. Much sooner than either had expected, Hiashi marked something on the scroll he had been studying, neatly rolled it up and placed it to the side before meeting his daughter's eyes. "What is it you need, Hinata?" His voice was not necessarily pleased, but it did not carry the disapproval she had expected at interrupting his work. He waited for her answer expectantly, businesslike. Mustering up her years of training as heiress, Hinata answered him. "A matter has been brought to my attention that I need your help with, father." She didn't give him a chance to interrupt her. "This will come as a shock to you and I ask you to please keep an open mind and not act rashly. There is no other way to say it than how it is, and I ask you to forgive my bluntness. Tenten sought me out earlier today to inform me that she is pregnant. With Neji's child. For a long time, he didn't say anything. He just stared. Those blank white eyes, so much like the ones she had come to know and trust, not giving anything away. He sat, stoic as ever, just staring at her. For a brief moment, Tenten wondered vaguely if Hiashi Hyuga could look into her without his Byakugan. Finally, he spoke. "Am I correct in assuming you will not simply give the child over to the clan?" Although his voice was much more gentle than she had expected, the same roiling emotions and striking need to protect her child boiled up inside of her. "No way in hell." Hiashi nodded, taking her harsh reply in stride. "I expected not," he said, a small, almost approving, smile gracing his lips. Tenten shot that thought down as soon as it appeared. Hiashi Hyuga didn't approve of anything beyond the pride and honor of his clan as far as she knew. "In that case, we have work to do." He began clearing his desk and preparing a new scroll. "I'm not letting you seal my baby," Tenten spit out harshly before she could stop herself. Logically, she knew it was a bad idea to goad this man. He was the one holding all of the cards, and he had far more power in this village than she did, but she couldn't help it. She needed him to know he would not have an easy fight with her. His pale eyes flashed up to her and pinned her more efficiently than any Sharingan could have in that moment. "I have no intention of sealing your child." His voice was low and carried both a threat and a good amount of insulted venom. On the contrary, I have every intention of making your child a member of the head family. Hiashi turned back to the scroll on his desk as Tenten and Hinata both floundered for words. Finally, Tenten found a shaky footing. I just told you, I'm not giving you my baby. The fact that Neji is the father doesn't give you any right to it. Tenten quipped, trying to smash down the panic welling up inside of her. She had no idea if the fact that Neji was the father could mean exactly that, but she wasn't just going to stand by and watch it happen. Again Hiashi pinned her in place with his white eyes, and for the first time, he allowed a small portion of anger to show on his face. I have made many mistakes in my life, young lady. It is at the front of my thoughts every day I look in the mirror and see my reflection instead of my brother. I know this, and I do not need to be reminded of it by you. I failed my brother when I allowed his death. I failed him again when I allowed my nephew to grow in hate. I failed my late wife when I failed to raise Hinata and Hanabi as I should have. I was only beginning to right some of those wrongs before Neji died, which was simply one more failure that I intend to make my last. The fact that Neji is the father of your child gives me no right to it, as a clan head, but as his uncle it gives me every right. Rest assured, I have no intention of taking your child from you. Instead, I have a proposition for you. When Tenten was once again rendered speechless by his unexpected reply, he continued. The elders will not be pleased when they hear a child has been conceived outside the clan. Although it is not guaranteed that the child will inherit the Byakugan, as it is a partially recessive gene, that could give us some leeway. However, with a Byakugan as powerful as Neji's was, I wouldn't put too much faith in that alone. That being said, I propose that you be officially adopted into the clan. Tenten was only vaguely aware of Hinata's quiet gasp. Father, can you do that? She asked, her voice hushed in disbelief. It will be tricky, but it's possible. And it will give us some breathing room. If Tenten is a member of the clan, the elders cannot complain that the child is outside of the clan. No doubt they will find some other angle to attack from, but for the time being, it will work. If, of course, you accept, he said, directing the last part at Tenten. She stared at him, unsure of what to do, or even of what his motivations might be. Finally she asked, why are you doing this? Hiashi sighed and leaned back in his chair, looking at Tenten with a thoughtful expression. As I said, I have made many mistakes in my life. I was only just beginning to atone for them when the war broke out. Neji is gone, and the only way I can honor him is by protecting what was important to him in life. That includes the child he left behind, and the woman he gave it to. Tenten still wasn't totally convinced. How much power over me does this give you? She asked distrustfully. If you agree to this, you will be, for all intents and purposes, my daughter. I intend to let it be known that you and Neji were betrothed, and despite his early passing, I have every intention of honoring the promise he would have made to you. I will have only as much power over you as I do over Hinata and Hanabi. And I believe that the last half-decade has shown that to be very little power indeed. Hiashi shot an affectionate smirk to his eldest daughter who blushed lightly before looking back at Tenten. This proposal is not meant to trap you, Tenten. I am trying to protect both your reputation and your child's status. I will not have my nephew's child labeled as a bastard, nor the woman whom, I believe, he loved, be branded as a harlot. The Hyuga clan would be honored to count you as one of its own. Again, that cursed little question bubbled up before her. What was she going to do? But this time, the dread and fear that had accompanied it before wasn't quite as invasive, not quite so loud. Tenten looked to Hinata and found a shocked, but eager smile shining back at her. Returning her gaze to Hiashi, Tenten was leveled with a small, encouraging smile she had seen only rarely on Neji's face. For the first time, the fact that half of Neji's DNA matched this man hit her, and Tenten was floored by the resemblance she could see between the man she had loved and his uncle. As she gave a small shaky smile in return, Tenten felt that tiny little seed of hope she had planted by taking a chance on Hinata begin to grow. Just shy of 5 months later, Hiashi was spending a quiet morning in his study, slowly plodding through his never-ending paperwork when the door violently slammed open and an uncharacteristically panicked Hanabi tore into the room. Hiashi looked up at her, feigning only mild interest as he waited for the news he had been expecting. He didn't have to wait long. Tenten's gone into labor. Hanabi bellowed, excitement and panic warring across her face. Hiashi glanced up at his youngest daughter from his paperwork, fighting back a small smile. "Then what on earth are you doing in here?" he asked mildly. "Weren't you asked to be an errand runner for the midwives?" "Father," Hanabi howled, her temper rising. "How can you be so calm? Tenten's going to have her baby." "Yes," he answered, still feigning his calm facade. "And women have been doing it for generations before her, and will continue to do it for generations after her. Regardless, these things usually take quite a while. There's not much sense in getting all excited when nothing will happen for hours. It's no place I need to be. You, however, had best be getting back in case something is needed." Hiashi's gentle prodding sent Hanabi sprinting out of the room and down the hall. He was about to call after her for forgetting to close the door when she darted back, slid it shut, and he heard her footsteps rush down the hall again. A small pleased smile finally cracked through his cool mask, and he attempted to ignore his own excitement and dive back into his work. It wasn't until after nightfall that Hanabi once again rushed into his study. He looked up at her, as coolly as he had that morning, and waited. Hanabi wore an ear-splitting grin and beamed at her father as she announced, "She's here." He matched her smile with a more reserved version and rose from his desk saying, "Then we'd best go and welcome her." Hiashi followed Hanabi through the compound to a small outer building that Hyuga women had used for generations to bring their children into the world. In a large room, Hiashi found a quiet scene. In the center, in a large bed, Tenten reclined against a mountain of pillows, a small bundle in her arms. To her side, young Rock Lee leaned in close, smiling widely down at the little thing. Against the far wall, Hiashi's eldest daughter stood talking quietly with the pink-haired apprentice of the Hokage, and next to her was Lady Tsunade herself. As he and Hanabi entered the room, all eyes turned to them. Hanabi immediately darted to Tenten's other side and gushed over the baby. Lady Tsunade smiled and strode to meet him. "How did it go?" he asked politely. "Couldn't have gone better," Tsunade answered. "Both mother and child are perfectly healthy and doing well, if a bit tired. You got a good pair with these two, Hiashi." Hiashi allowed another of his rare smiles and answered, "I know." Moving to Hanabi's side, Hiashi caught his first glimpse of the baby. A small, slightly squashed, pale face rested in Tenten's arms. A sparse dusting of dark hair could be seen and little else as the child was wrapped up like sushi. Tenten smiled up at him and slightly raised the baby toward him. "Come to meet your granddaughter?" she asked, only a little bit of teasing in her voice. Hiashi gently took the little girl, remembering vividly the first time he had held a child, Hinata, and later, Hanabi, and felt the same incredible rush of love and devotion. "What is her name?" he asked quietly, bouncing the girl in his arms. "Kazu Hyuga," Tenten answered softly as she watched her daughter. "She's the daughter of the greatest branch member this family has ever seen, and she won't be sealed. She's going to unite this family once and for all." Kazu fidgeted in her tight wrappings for a moment and then slowly blinked open white Byakugan eyes. Hiashi smiled down at her and thought to himself, "Yes, she will." She wasn't entirely sure what it was that woke her, but the sudden fall into consciousness jolted her senses. Being a trained ninja, nothing changed. Her breathing kept the same deep, slow, steady rhythm. Her body didn't shift, she didn't even open her eyes. She listened carefully to the sounds around her room, but nothing stood out to her as unusual. Only the crickets hummed outside, and an owl hooted somewhere. But something was off, she knew it. Her eye cracked open, hardly a sliver, and slowly scanned her dark room. Her door still shut, her desk untouched, her bookshelf a silent tower against the wall, and her white kimono for tomorrow hanging from it. Her sharp eyes nearly missed it. A small shadow huddled in the far corner, and her heart nearly skipped until she recognized the faint shock of yellow. No longer bothering with her charade, Hinata sat up, squinting through the darkness for a better look. Her fiancé huddled in the dark corner of her bedroom, unmoving, and only a tiny glint of the moon reflecting off his eyes clued her in to the fact that he was watching her. Her eyebrows drew together, puzzled. When Naruto went to the trouble to sneak into the Hyuga compound, he usually just crawled into bed with her, hoping she could keep his nightmares away. "Naruto, what are you doing here?" As soon as she said it, that slightly off-kilter feeling settled in her stomach. It wasn't threatening or dangerous, but it was definitely not normal. When a low dark chuckle rolled across the room to her, that feeling multiplied exponentially. "Ruto?" she asked uncertainly, tensing. The form in the corner rose fluidly, an inhuman grace present in the motion. "Not exactly." The figure stepped forward and moonlight from the open window fell across Naruto's face, highlighting rusty red eyes. "He's in here." A finger tapped lightly against a temple, "but he's loosened my leash a bit." The demon stalked across the room to her, lifting a knee onto the bed and leaning into her until they were nearly nose to nose. Red eyes roamed her face, examining her eyes, and a hand came up to brush her bangs to the side. She wanted to move, back away, regain a bit of space, but she couldn't. Oddly, she felt more like she was hypnotized rather than frozen. She wasn't afraid, not even remotely, strange as it was. There was not a drop of threat in the air. His eyes continued to roam over her face and body, his fingers gently tugging and twisting her long hair. "Why are you here?" she asked in a whisper. The demon leaned away from her, settling back on his heels, but his eyes never left her. He scrutinized her for a moment more before he answered. "I'm curious." His voice was still Naruto's, mostly. The familiar warm timbre still present, but there was a lower, more primal tone that seemed to have dominated it. "Curious about what?" Hinata prompted. She had no idea what the demon sealed inside her fiancé was doing in her room at this unholy hour of the night, on the eve of her wedding, and she needed to understand. "You, obviously." He threw out the answer like it was the most apparent thing in the world. "Me?" she asked, surprised. Why on earth would the nine-tailed fox be curious about her? "Of course, you," he replied, nearly managing to scoff at her as he rolled his fiery eyes. He answered her before she could ask why again. "Tomorrow, you and my host will perform your human's ridiculous bonding ceremony." Sarcasm was thick in his voice and Hinata understood he did not hold the sanctity of marriage in very high regard. "It's high time I officially met the one that has so thoroughly ensnared Naruto of all people." Dread welled up in Hinata's chest as she realized his intention. He was here to judge if she was worthy of Naruto. What would she do if he found her lacking? What happens if you don't approve? The question was out of her mouth before she could stop it. The fox snorted derisively. "It hardly matters whether I approve or not. Naruto has chosen to bind his life to yours and there is nothing I, nor anyone else for that matter, can do about it. Besides, the bond between you had him runs far deeper than you may think. Even if, by some impossible wonder you two were separated, either by your choice or someone else's, Naruto would fight to the death to get you back. The two of you were always meant to be together." Hinata frowned, not liking how close to destiny that sounded. "Don't misunderstand me, you always have a choice. You and Naruto could choose to never be together, and life would continue on. But neither of you would be happy without your other half. The two of you are simply one part of a whole. Whatever I may feel about that doesn't matter. Lucky for me, I don't expect to be disappointed." Hinata's surprise must have shown on her face because he continued. "I've been watching you for some time now. Years, in fact. You really are a strange creature." He said it with something almost akin to affection, but Hinata wasn't entirely sure if she should take it as a compliment or an insult. "Naruto cares for you," he told her, and Hinata couldn't help but wonder why he felt the need to say something that was so obvious. "He cares about everyone he meets, but you are different. Special. You affect him in a way that no one ever has before." Hinata didn't understand what he was talking about. Naruto was an incredibly open person, and what others around him did always had some effect. Although others' thoughts or actions may not change the way he felt or acted, they did impact him and made him think. Hinata was not any different in this regard. As she opened her mouth to ask him to explain, Kurama once again beat her to the punch. "I don't think you truly grasp just how strong your influence over him is. I believe you remember when pain attacked?" Hinata could not suppress the shudder that skittered down her spine and the demon's twisted smile on Naruto's face grew. The pure, unadulterated shock and fear that rolled through him when you attacked. "I have never felt anything so irresistible in all my long years." The demon grew quiet, as if reliving those moments. "Why are you telling me this?" Hinata asked, her voice small. Red eyes refocused on her again and a thoughtful look overtook his face. "Naruto has become my friend. My comrade," he said, his voice becoming businesslike. "The first I have had since I was with Old Man Six Paths. Despite what you humans think, we, demons, are not evil simply for the sake of being evil. We thrive on emotions, the stronger the better. It just so happens that fear, and hatred, and revenge happen to burn the hottest the longest in you humans more often than not. And the ones that feel those emotions the strongest are the ones that try to use me and my siblings as weapons, and they are the ones that leave behind the stories. Naruto is different, and since the war, he has had a strong influence on me. I intend to make sure he never again feels the fear he felt for you on that day, and the hate he harbored for Pain. It is not like him, and he is simply too good to suffer that again. What does that have to do with me? A spark of annoyance flashed in the fox's eyes for a moment before passing. When Naruto believed Pain had killed you, he released 8 tails of my chakra. That has never happened before. Not a single one of my jailers has ever lost control in such a way, and there have been many that had less control of me than him. You are more important to this boy than any other thing in this world. Hinata doubted that. As much as she loved him, and knew that he loved her, she couldn't help being practical. Naruto's dream was to become Hokage, and he loved the leaf with all his heart. He was still looking under every rock and blade of grass he came across, dreaming of the day Sasuke returned. Kurama frowned, as if sensing her skepticism. He argued his point. When that Uchiha brat left the village, Naruto was furious, and swore to one day bring him back. His hold on me only wavered for a moment, but the idea that I could break free was beyond laughably pathetic. When he learned of his sensei's death he was heartbroken, but I was no closer to freedom than before despite the seal weakening. When he returned from training to find his village reduced to dust and the vast majority of his people gone, I was not given an inch. There have been only a scattering few times he was broken enough for me to stretch my limbs a little, but never very far. 5 tails was the most. When he believed you had left this world, he lost control as never before in an instant and was about to release me entirely before his father repaired the seal. Don't doubt how much you mean to him. Hinata didn't know what to say. What he'd said was true. Naruto had never lost control like that day, before or since, and it had been because of her. That being said, I feel obligated to make sure he is never that broken again. Kurama formed a hand sign and a large scroll appeared on Hinata's bed. How are you going to do that? She asked, her eyes roaming the intricate red and black scroll. Am I correct that you have not signed a summoning contract? He asked instead of answering her, rolling the scroll out across her sheets. Hinata shook her head as she watched him, still examining the scroll. There was only one other name, Hagoromo Otsutsuki. Then I have a proposition. This is a summoning contract with the foxes of Kita. I assume you are familiar with summons? Yes, but why are you offering one to me? Hinata knew that she shouldn't try to understand the reasoning of a demon, but she couldn't help it. She held a great deal of empathy for those around her, and trying to understand was simply second nature to her. Kurama gave her a wry look, not saying anything for a moment, and then smiled mischievously. Finally, I don't feel like telling you that. Turning his attention back to the scroll, he changed the subject. If you agree to this contract, you will be able to summon the foxes of Kita. You will have a personal summon, like Naruto with his toads, but you will also be able to summon any you need. You will also be able to summon me, and by extension Naruto to you, as I am a part of this contract. The idea that she would be able to summon Naruto and Kurama to her whenever she needed was the last tiny shove she needed to accept. Pushing down the idea that the fox had some ulterior motive, Hinata accepted and listened carefully as he walked her through the signing and instructed her how to summon. When he prompted her, Hinata gathered the chakra necessary and, relying on what she had been told and what she had learned from watching Naruto, slammed her hand into the mattress of her bed. A cloud of white smoke flared up and then quickly dissipated, leaving in its place a small snow-white fox kit. The poor thing had obviously been caught off guard by the summoning and was lying on its back, the bushy white tail twisted under it. It yipped, managing to sound both surprised and annoyed, and squirmed to its feet, pinning Hinata with a pair of steely blue eyes. 2 red markings were under her eyes, but that was the only distinguishing feature. Meet Rokushi, Kurama said, and when Hinata tore her eyes from the fox cub to look at him, his eyebrows were raised and he looked slightly impressed. She'll be your personal summon. Hinata looked back down at the cub, a bit worried for her size. She looked like the only thing that would keep her from fitting in a teacup would be her bushy tail. Don't worry, Kurama assured her. She'll grow. Don't hesitate to summon her. You'll need to bond with her and get to know each other if you ever intend to fight together. With another quick hand sign, the scroll was gone in a puff of smoke. You can get to that another time though. I believe you have somewhere important to be tomorrow. Rokushi, you may return to the den. Little Rokushi glanced up from sniffing around Hinata curiously. She pinned Kurama with a stare, obviously debating whether to obey him or not, before looking at Hinata one last time. She yipped, butted her head against Hinata's hand and then was gone in a puff of smoke. Hinata looked back to Kurama and watched as red rust melted into blue pools before her eyes, and abruptly Naruto was sitting on Hinata's bed in front of her. A smug grin stretched across his face and he leaned in to place a kiss on her lips, lingering a moment longer than usual. "Hey, Nata," he murmured languidly against her lips, that smirk still firmly in place. Although she had witnessed it before, the speed with which Naruto and Kurama could switch control, for lack of a better term, was always a little disorienting and hard to follow. She leaned away from him enough to see his face clearly and let her brain catch up. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Naruto smirked and he moved in again to kiss her, shrugging slightly as he said, "Kurama wanted to offer the summoning contract to you. Something about joining the pack. And I wanted to see you." Again, Hinata retreated, halfway to lying on her back as Naruto loomed over her, that damn smug smile still taunting her, trying to distract her so he could kiss her senseless. Couldn't it have waited till later? Hinata dodged his lips and laughed, trying to keep quiet, as he began tickling her neck. "We have a busy day tomorrow," she gasped between laughs, pushing against his shoulders and squirming to get away. Naruto abruptly pulled back and his sultry smirk had transformed into a smile full of childlike glee, innocent and excited. "I know, but I wanted to see you," he repeated, placing a chaste kiss on her cheek. By now Hinata was laid out flat on her back and Naruto sidled up next to her, pressing against her body and supporting himself on one arm to smile down at her. His free arm slid over her stomach and around her waist and a thumb idly rubbed circles into her side. "Kurama just decided to kill two birds with one stone and offer you the contract." Hinata flushed lightly, pleased to hear he wanted to see her enough to sneak into the compound, and still a bit odd that the nine-tailed fox had offered her a summoning contract. Even so, it was late, and she knew Hanabi would be along in only a few hours to collect her. Hinata placed a hand against Naruto's chest and pushed gently, trying to coax him from the bed. "You know I'm always glad to see you, but it's late and we have a lot to do tomorrow. I need my beauty sleep." She said the last bit with only a small bit of satire, a habit she had picked up from him, and pushed a bit more insistently. Naruto was reluctant, but he rolled to his feet with an exaggerated sigh and smiled down at her tenderly. "You could go the rest of your life without sleep and still be the most beautiful woman in the world, Nata. But, fine, I can tell when I'm not wanted, so I'll let you get back to your boring sleep. Just make sure you don't get too much and miss our wedding tomorrow." Giggling at his teasing, Hinata stood on her low bed, putting her only a few inches higher than him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "You know I wouldn't miss it for the world," she breathed before catching his lips with her own, reveling in the feeling of his body against hers as his hands rose to circle her waist. When his fingers began playing with the ends of her hair, Hinata pulled back, preventing him from pursuing her by holding his face in her hands gently. If she let this go on, she'd never get back to sleep. Naruto flashed his million-watt grin at her and gently squeezed around her waist before letting her go and hopping onto the window sill. He glanced at her over his shoulder, backlit by the moonlight outside, and promised, "See ya tomorrow, Hinata." Then he was gone. It wasn't until after Hinata had changed from her white wedding kimono into her bright orange and blue irauchikake with whirlpool motifs around the edges that she found a moment to have an actual conversation with her new husband. The morning had been filled with final preparations, and then the journey to the Shinto shrine for the actual ceremony had dominated Hinata's attention. Now, back in the Hyuga compound for the dinner and celebration with their friends and family, the fox's actions and his possible motives occupied Hinata's thoughts. She followed Hanabi out to the garden and immediately scoured the guests for a head of bright hair. He was on the other side of the garden, standing beside Kakashi's seat near the high table. He was laughing at something Choji had said and she quickly crossed to him, greeting guests politely as she went. She wasn't really disappointed when he noticed her before she reached him, considering he was a shinobi, but the look of surprise on his face when he saw the color she had chosen for her second outfit was priceless. His face erupted in an enormous smile and he wrapped his arms around her tightly, ignoring Kiba's whistle and the girl's gushing. "Have I ever told you how fantastic you look in orange?" he whispered quietly in her ear, pressing his smile into her hair. Hinata laughed, blushing slightly. Kiba broke them up. All right, the bride's here now, so get your asses up to the high table so we can eat. You can gawk at her after you let me have my food," he teased, rankling Naruto good-naturedly. Naruto glared at him, sticking his tongue out, and threw him an impolite hand gesture which Kiba laughed at before pulling Hinata away and escorting her to their seats. He gave a few words of thanks to their guests for their overwhelming support, and then tucked into dinner. They ate for a while before Hinata's thoughts got the better of her. "Naruto?" He looked at her, a hand resting on her thigh affectionately under the table, and gave her his full attention. "I still don't understand why Kurama came to me last night. I'm sorry, and I know it's not really important for me to know, but I can't stop thinking about it." Naruto smiled and squeezed her thigh gently. "Is that all? Don't worry, Kurama just likes to know that he knows things other people don't. He wanted to officially meet you, not in the middle of a battle I mean, and offer you the contract because he likes you." At Hinata's surprised expression Naruto laughed. "He'll never admit it in a million years, but he does. He knows how important you are to me, and that makes you important to him. He misses having a pack like back when he was with the other Biju and the Sage of Six Paths, and I think he's decided that I'm going to be his new pack, and because you're my wife now." Naruto smiled widely when he called her his wife, leaning in and nuzzling her ear fondly. "You're a part of that pack. He'll do whatever it takes to protect you." Hinata considered this for a moment, her chopsticks playing with the food in front of her. "So, he likes me because I'm your wife, and he wants to protect me to keep you from getting hurt?" Naruto grimaced a little, like he wasn't entirely sure how to explain it. "Kinda. He does want to protect me and you because of that, but he also wants to protect you because you're you. Kurama respects you, as a shinobi, as a person, and now, yes, because you're my wife, but you being mine is only a new addition. He's liked you and respected you since you stood up to pain. I think it may even go all the way back to when you fought Neji in the Chunin exams. Like I said, he'll never admit it, but Kurama likes anyone that follows their dreams and sticks to what they say they'll do. He told you that demons are influenced by emotions, right?" Hinata nodded, listening carefully while Naruto explained. "Demons like emotions that are pure. When there are a bunch of different feelings all mixed together they just get annoyed, they like things that are simple, focused. One of the reasons he doesn't like the Uchiha so much is because they have such incredibly strong emotions, all of the powerful ones like hatred and revenge, that it gives them an immense amount of control. Through hatred, controlling others is easy. He likes you so much because you are the exact opposite." Again Hinata was a little confused, not quite sure what Naruto meant. He smiled fondly at her again. "You are so good, and pure, and loving in everything light in this world, Hinata, and you don't even realize it. Kurama likes you because you feel emotions like love and forgiveness and peace so strongly that he can build off of that, become stronger, but still be in control of himself, free to make his own decisions. Love is a powerful thing that can control others, like hate, but instead of scaring someone into doing something, forcing them into it. Love compels people to do things through their own decisions. People choose to change, to become better, to help others through love. And I think Kurama wants to protect that in you at all costs. And now, because of the contract, he and I are only a summon away." Hinata smiled at her new husband, reveling in the fact that he was finally hers, and now they would never be too far apart. "Anyway," Naruto said, drawing her out of her thoughts again. He caught her chin with his hand and kissed her softly. "Forget the fox. It's our wedding and I want to dance with my wife. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.